And I am Renia Ehrenfeucht. I am the chair of the Committee on the Academy, and it is so good to see you all here at ACSP's Chair School. I am also a professor and chair at the University of New Mexico. And as a chair, I very much appreciate all the work you're doing as program directors and chairs. And I also realize, like, it's, at least from my perspective, been a very exhausting period, but also one that feels very important. I know many of you have been doing work around racial justice and for many, many years. And then there's many more who are now really, really stepping up and being accountable in that way and trying to hold our institutions accountable. Feeling all this work really matters, and what the work our students will do will matter. But I also know that it's been a time that there's been a lot of work. And so I'm even more grateful to all of you to have the opportunity to talk with you today, but also to see you here and that you're taking the time to do this. As we begin today, I would like to turn it over to Marlon Burnett, president of ACSP, and then I will explain more how the day will unfold and we'll get started. So Marlon?
Renia, thank you so much. First of all, I really want to send out a big thank you to Renia for the work that she and her committee have done throughout the past year. Not only the new chair school, but there's been a host of webinars and activities that the Committee on the Academy has taken on, and greatly appreciated. And I'm thrilled to see here on my Zoom screen many old friends and several new friends, and just really want to welcome you. And as department chairs, or maybe in some cases program directors, you are really absolutely at the center of what the Planning Academy is doing and what we hope it can be. And thank you. And it's a rewarding job. It's sometimes a tough job. I was talking to a colleague about a week ago, and I mentioned that 2020 is a little bit like the old game of whack-a-mole. But then I realized that it's more like an old video game called Frogger. I don't know if any of you remember that video game. Ed Fazer is not, I see him nodding his head, where if you are able to successfully dodge a car, the prize that you win is that you then get to dodge the next incoming car, and repeat that. And that might sound a little depressing, and I don't mean it that way, but partly we can all humorously think of 1980s video games. And partly I want to just kind of mention that, of course, we shouldn't really think of department chairing as only that while you're dodging these metaphorical cars, you want to keep your eye on some bigger picture things. And Renia asked, were there any pieces of insight that I have? And so let me offer two briefly, not to try to steal the thunder from the very good panelists that you will hear from. One is that in your activities as department chair, really do all you can to be thinking about the future and how you are aligning your department's work with the goals of your university and the needs and goals of your communities. Everything I've found, not only in the work that I've done, but in the work that I've seen other people do, is that when you get into a moment of crisis, the work that you have done in advance is what you fall back on. So always try to see beyond the curve. The second thing I would say, and I think all of you know this, I know a lot of you, and you do this instinctively, as leaders, you set the tone. There was a moment many years ago when there was a student incident in a class in a department I was chairing. And of course, because of that, it was completely confidential. And I was talking to a colleague early morning, and the colleague said, everything you do today, all the students will be watching you. And I said, well, that's impossible because this is a confidential matter that they can't know about it. And he said, Marlon, they know, and they are all watching to see what you do. And now the first part of that, I don't want to dwell on too much, but word travels fast. But your students are always watching you. They're watching your tone, the way you handle issues that arise. They're watching it not specifically for the exact answer that you give, but the sense of humanity that you bring, the sense of balance, fairness, transparency. And I think they're watching that even more now than they have in the past. I know you all will do wonderfully. Just simply be who you are, and you'll be giving your students all that they need. But I just thought I'd mention that all the same. Let me say some thank yous to, there's a lot of people who've done some really hard work to make this event happen. The Committee on the Academy has really done fantastic work rethinking both the new chair school and the administrators conference, which will happen in March, launching fantastic programming and doing that in a virtual setting. So thank you to Renya as chair and the committee members, Don Jordan, Ed Fazer, Rolf Pendahl, Samina Raja, Lisa Servan, Cherie Smith, Stacy White, and Joseli Macedo. The budgeting session this morning. Thank you so much to Ed Fazer for joining us. I bet that even as he's here, he has his faculty members emailing him on all other ideas that they've probably thought of. And so, Ed, thank you for being with us for a few minutes. And Tim Chapin will be presenting in the afternoon on formal and informal roles of chairs. And so a huge thank you to Tim. Your budgeting panel this morning, I want to thank the panelists, Chris Silver, Ted Jojala, Stacy Harwood, and Jim Spencer, who will tell us about the initiatives that they have been involved in. The afternoon panel, I want to say thank you in advance to Priyam Das and the 3 Committee on the Academy members, Cherie Smith, Lisa Servan, and Ross Pendle, who will join. Last but absolutely not least, I want to say thank you to Donna Dodd and to the full ACSP staff. They make every event and all of the work on our committees happen. And I want to thank her for this event, and I want to particularly say thank you for this interesting moment over the early summer where we were thinking about how to do a virtual panel. And at one point, the governing board said, well, what if we just take the whole conference and move it online? And thank you to Donna for not batting an eye and for the wonderful conference that you hosted about a month ago. And thank you to the staff. Lastly, I want to double back to all of you. Thank you to all of you. Again, what you're doing is fundamental. It's central to the universities and to planning. Probably none of you had global pandemic mentioned in your appointment letter. I know I've been searching mine, trying to see if this was accounted for. And thank you so much. And so all your letters, by the way, probably included a phrase something like other duties as assigned. Your dean will actually tell you that includes global pandemic if you ask. So thank you for all of you. Thank you. And Renya, let me give the floor back to you.
Well, thank you, Marlon. And now I would like to invite everyone to introduce yourself in the chat. I mean, of course, name an institution, anything else you would like to mention, please do so. You know, if you're just starting as chair this semester, or, you know, wishing you were exiting or are exiting, or just anything else, but certainly name an institution. Just it'd be great. I know many of us know each other, but not everybody. And now, as you do that, I just want to talk through today. So this is the chair school, which is often associated with the administrators conference. And we decided to have it at 2 different times right now, just because you know, many of us end up feeling when we're in Zoom meetings day in, day out, that we feel things pressing because we're sitting at our desks and we know emails coming in. And also it just becomes an exhausting way to concentrate. So we broke them up a little bit. And what we are doing today is the morning session, as you know, is going to be focused on strategic budgeting. and Ed Fazer will be leading that, who is a provost and executive vice president at Oregon State University. In about approximately an hour and 45 minutes, we'll take a short break, and then we're going to return for a panel about innovative budgeting initiatives that programs have undertaken. Marlon mentioned that, and I'll introduce the panel then. We will then have an hour break, and then and then many of you, or most of you, are returning for a presentation by Tim Chapin on the formal and informal roles of chairs, and that's really oriented towards, those of us who are newer at being chairs. And then there'll be a panel with current chairs who've been chairs just for a couple of years about their experiences as they got started, followed by a breakout session where there'll be an opportunity to meet and talk. So in the sessions, there will be time for questions after the main presentations. And so you can use the raise hand function or ask questions in chat. I will be doing my best to catch all questions. You can also unmute yourself if you're calling in or if I don't see you. And I think we're a small enough group that can work, but we will, try to do this the best. And so my apologies if I'm overlooking you, and I will be trying to make sure that we catch everyone. If there are any immediate questions now about today and how it will unfold, please just unmute yourself and ask. And certainly we can clarify anything. And if there aren't, because I know it's pretty straightforward, then I would just, let's get started. And I will, turn this over to Ed Fazer. Ed is the provost and executive vice president of Oregon State University. And he has extensive experience in different roles, including having served as department chair. But he also has experience at numerous institutions at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, the University of Manchester, and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And so from that, he also has a lot of insight into how administrative work and structures differ and are similar across our institutions. And so with that, Ed, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Renia. Good morning, everybody. Really good to see you all and to meet you, and also add my thanks to Renia's and to Marlon's for taking on these roles. It just can't be said often enough how important the department chair is, the program director, to the success of a university. The university is built on successful departments and programs. That's where it starts. And I know probably all of you, or a very high share of you, got into your careers with no desire to become a department chair or a program director. It's not probably why you pursued the work that you did. I know when I first became a department head, I hadn't really thought about it at all up to that point, at least that I would necessarily take it on. But it's really important that it be done really well. So thank you for what you're doing, and to some degree it's a sacrifice, I know, for your career. So what we're going to do, I'm going to stick in the chat. We have a little bit of a homework assignment, but it's an easy one. To start us out, I'm going to put a link to an article by Allison Valancourt in the chat, and it will just take about 3 minutes to read. So we thought we'd just have you read that, and then we're going to come back and do a little pop quiz that's based on some of the concepts in the article, and then we'll go from there. We'll talk a little bit about what we see in the pop quiz, and then I'll give a short presentation on just an overview of how to think about strategic budgeting in your units, the way I have framed it, or lessons I've learned over the course of doing the department headship at Illinois, and subsequently provost at Illinois on an interim basis, and here dean at Illinois. So I'll try to put all that together in a frame that maybe helps you think about how you might approach budgeting for your unit. So let me and have you take just a minute or two to read that. And if you let us know right away if you can't access that, and we'll try to provide it in another form. So Donna, to look like we have most voters.
We've got 31 out of 36, 86%.
Well, let's just, so I think do we have the results? Can everybody see the results on the screen? No, some people can't.
They should be able to now.
Okay. So these aren't obviously not, we're not looking for the actual answers here, but I wanted to put these up for a couple of reasons. And the last, by the way, the item there, obviously, if I have to know this, I don't want to be chair, tongue in cheek. But I have noticed in working with department chairs over time that there is a kind of 5 stages of grief in some aspects of these roles. And budgeting is kind of one of those where you sort of, especially if you're a chair for a limited period, like a 3-year term, and you're in a chair arrangement where you've been kind of voted into the job by your peers, you may be, it may take a while to internalize the fact that you've got to spend a fair amount of time trying to understand your budget and manage your budget. And so I stuck that on just as a little bit of a joke, but I think it is true for a lot of new department chairs that the financial aspects of the department are not what fire them up. And understanding some of the very complex dynamics that are affecting our universities, especially our public institutions, was not really something that you would imagine spending a lot of your time on. So let's talk just about a couple of these things. First, what percentage of annual revenue from your institution was from tuition and fee earnings? Obviously, this is a really important one. A lot of people can hazard a pretty good guess. This is a source of frustration for a lot of our faculty in the sense that it's growing, right? The percentage of our revenue as institutions, and I'm guessing that for the majority of people here, you're at public universities, coming from tuition and fees is growing. And our faculty don't often like to recognize this. It means that we have to be much more responsive to student demand and student interest and student willingness to pay. And it creates more instability for the institution itself than when you could rely on state appropriations that would be relatively stable. I don't know, there's not a week that goes by that I'm not talking to some group about the importance of being sensitive to the fact that more and more of our fate is determined by our enrollment. And that's a challenge for the institution as a whole, but it's even more challenging as you go down the ranks into the departments. And I know for urban planning, ever since I've been in the field, enrollment's a challenge. We've been working on this problem, and perhaps maybe in recent years, even more so. So this is something where a department chair has to get good at explaining these dynamics to people. The second one, what percentage of the total amount of your university spent in the last fiscal year, excluding restricted funds? For example, at Oregon State, our budget is about 1.2 billion, but our discretionary spending, or what we call education and general funding, is only around 582 million. So that's the, once you take out contracts, grants, and other things, and auxiliary spending as well, athletics, housing, and dining. What percentage of that was for faculty and staff salaries? Majority of people say they can make a good guess. That's good. It's probably, I'm guessing, in your units between 80 and 90%. Could be in some units, it'll be upwards of 90%. You have almost no latitude, right? Almost no discretion in many cases. And this is very challenging to manage at the department level. It's why in any strategic budgeting, you have to have a mindset of not just managing your budget, but positioning your unit to gain more. Right? That's something that the panel will talk about this afternoon, but we'll talk about in a little bit here. And I'll try to give you some suggestions based on my experience as a dean and as a provost, looking at budget requests on how you might gain additional resources so that you can take some strategic actions. Marlon's exactly right. You have to be thinking strategically, but it's really hard when so much of your latitude financially is tied up in personnel and you don't really have a lot of flexibility in many cases there. So let's look at the next one. What percentage of your university's annual budget comes from state appropriations? Via direct appropriations, direct payments on behalf. Some universities, the states are actually paying the benefits directly and through state support for low-income students. Again, reasonably good guess, a little less confidence here. If you look at our budget, 7 out of 10 of our dollars now are coming from tuition, so 3 out of 10 coming out of state appropriations. But what people often forget is that there's a state appropriation for financial aid, typically in most states. And in the legislator's mind, that is higher ed. And something that's interesting, when I was at University of Illinois, there was a narrative at the university that the state kept cutting our budget every year. And that was true if you looked at the discretionary allocation that the state made to the university for direct appropriation. But if you counted what the state was investing in payments on behalf, benefits, in fact, the state's contribution to the University of Illinois had been relatively stable for many years. And what faculty never realized was if you sat in Springfield and you thought about, well, what am I going to put in the higher ed bucket? The legislators thinking payments on behalf plus direct appro plus tuition, financial aid for students. That's what they're thinking. And they're looking at it and going, well, we're giving you pretty good, stable support here. Faculty are angry because the direct appropriation year after year is coming down, squeezed out by rising benefits costs. And so for the faculty members, it's like, oh, yet another year. And honestly, the university administration perpetuated this. They would say, well, we got cut again, direct appropriation. They would not point out that benefit spending went up. So there was a disconnect in the faculty's understanding of the dynamic. And they would talk in angry terms about what the legislature was doing to them year after year in cutting their budget. And you could still argue the legislature should have boosted the direct appropriation and the benefit spending. You could make that case, and as a provost there, I made that case. But the reality was, not recognizing what they had done eroded a lot of goodwill in the legislature. And it created confusion in the faculty as to what dynamic was actually happening. So when you had bigger debates in the state about, do we need to make some adjustments in escalating benefits? Of course, everyone would resist that, not recognizing what the underlying dynamics were. I raise all that because your job as a chair is in some ways to help people understand some of these things. So you can do what Marlon mentioned, which was figure out how to be part of a larger institution that's navigating a changing financial climate in your particular state, if you're at a state institution. So let's go on to the next one. What percentage of your, did we cover all three? Universities' student body is Pell eligible. Some lack of confidence on this. It's a good one to know, right? A rising share of our students, especially in public institutions, is Pell eligible. And that student body typically, not uniformly, but typically needs additional support. And that additional support costs money. But more important in my experience, it requires behavioral change on the part of our faculty. It requires different pedagogy. It requires different technology to serve that portion of the student body. And that is, as I say, a rising share of who we're teaching. So anyway, that's just kind of to get things started. Does anybody have a question or comment on those? Unmute. I think we have, we only have 40 participants. If you want to unmute and just jump in or raise your hand, whatever you're comfortable with.
And I don't know if this is the moment, but Liz put a question in the chat that I do think is something that many of us feel as department chairs. It's about really how much control over department funds we have, since so much of our budgets are tied up in contract salary. And I don't know if you have any, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, often you have very little, honestly. And where you have control are people that you're often trying to protect. Your graduate students who are providing GTA support, your untenured faculty who are naturally vulnerable to being the balance wheel in how the budget works, and often your untenured faculty are delivering yeoman's work in your unit. So it is not to criticize our tenured faculty, but that's a reality. So in the near term, you often don't have a lot of latitude. This is true. This is why you have to think strategically, because your latitude will come in partnership with your dean, not so much with your provost. This is kind of getting ahead of myself, but the way you move your unit and position it to be stronger is often going to mean some additional investment you receive in the near term to meet objectives that position you to be a stronger unit financially in the longer term. And no dean worth their salt would turn that down. And I know when deans bring me that kind of proposal as a provost, I don't turn it down. The trick is to actually be true to that vision. So if the notion is, if you have a unit that's, we're really struggling, say you're struggling with enrollment, we need to make some hiring changes, or we need to add a person over here to build a program in X. And I can make a case that by doing that, it will produce resources in the longer run, but cost some money in the near term. That's an investment. So your flexibility comes in your strategy, typically. It does not come in your near-term ability to reallocate. You don't usually have much latitude there. So this is why if you are reactive as a budgeter, you're going to struggle to gain additional resources. You have to be proactive as a budgeter.
And Betsy asked a question that's directly related to the questions about explaining the difference between Pell eligible versus not.
Yeah, Pell eligible is a shorthand way of saying students with high financial needs. So we could define that better. It's hard to come up with a good measure. So a typical measure that universities use are students who are eligible for Pell grants. Those are students with high financial need. And that share of our student body has grown over time. And it is, as you might imagine, predominantly students of color and first generation students. So the intersections of who falls into that category create specific kinds of needs, opportunities, and challenges for the universities to manage. And that has increased our costs in some regards, but for good reason.
And Mary has a question.
Sure. Hi, I'm Mary Davis. I'm at Tufts, the chair at Tufts University. And so we're a private institution, and I'm curious so I have no control over these things, the budget set by the dean's office. Sometimes I get it even after the fiscal year has started. And so, of course, I negotiate with the dean on things that I need, and I do all that. But the questions that you raised in the quiz, how important and which ones of them should private school chairs be focused on? I don't know the answer to any. I put no idea on all of them because I'm not sure how relevant they are to my negotiations with the dean. So that's what I'd like to know.
Yeah, your situations are going to vary. Some colleges are different than others. Well, first of all, you have a private versus public distinction. These questions are more germane and some, not uniformly, but more so for public universities than private ones. But private ones are highly tuition sensitive, more so in many ways than public ones. But obviously the direct allocation is not so relevant. What depends on your situation as a chair depends on how your dean allocates or your college allocates to the unit. Some of you, that may be just determined and you don't have a lot of control. Depends on the budget model in your institution. So when I was a dean, and this is really not a public school, private school distinction. When I was a dean, in my college, we allocated to the department, but it was based on very clear metrics and deliberations about what each department yielded from a revenue standpoint and what each department cost. And so I would go to my dean and we would have conversations as an administrative council, or I would go to the department heads would go to the dean and say, all right, I need a faculty member in X. These are the reasons why we are trying to build this program. And we would deliberate it as an administrative council on the relative value of that investment for the college as a whole. You may not be in that situation. In my view, universities need to evolve to that world where you are able to bring the kinds of things you need to the table with other department chairs and heads in your college and talk about it as a college conversation. The reason why that's really important is within a college, there's a huge amount of cross subsidy that's occurring behind the scenes that you may not see. And the fact that you don't see it and you don't know it is what limits the college's ability to be successful, in my opinion. So to give you an example, in my college at Illinois, traditionally the School of Architecture produced a huge amount of net revenue. This was before the collapse of architecture enrollments, but it produced a lot of revenue. And we would take a big chunk of that revenue and we would pump it over to the School of Music. And School of Music, almost no schools of music produce net revenue. I don't think there's probably one in the country, right? They all lose money, but that's what they do, right? To deliver quality music education, you have to do it a certain way and it costs. So we take money from one unit and we help backfill the other. We do this university-wide. The classics department at most universities is a net revenue producer. Engineering sucks you dry. And the irony is on the faculty, they think it's the reverse. That's how much ignorance there is out there among faculties. So if you don't have latitude with your dean, one step is to go talk to the dean and say, I need to understand how you're making decisions about how funding is distributed across the college, and what can I do to help position my unit to help make the college stronger? What kinds of investments might we talk about? And this is why department heads have to think, I like to say, with two hats. One hat is your unit, and the other hat is your college. To go back to the music architecture example, I knew we had a breakthrough with our unit heads when we had an administrative council meeting with the different unit heads around the table, and the music director, school director came in and said, I need to make 2 hires to teach guitar because student demand for guitar instructions like through the roof. And looking at the university's budget model, it would produce a significant revenue flow. It was the only couple of positions we could hire in the college that year. And the School of Architecture and several other units said, let's do it. They didn't get the hires. They didn't get the faculty members they wanted. What they realized was it wasn't really directly that they needed more positions if they didn't have the revenue to pay for it. They needed to shore up the revenue flow. So if you don't have latitude in your college, if you're not having these conversations, press your dean to have them. It's not a helpful advice if your dean is not responsive. But you have to think about your unit and then your college as a whole. And wise deans will share that information.
And there's one other question that if you want to address now or may come up later is, if we are talking about getting more money, are we now just talking about endowments and fundraising for state schools when there's, tight fiscal times?
Yeah, I don't think so. Where the real money is? The real money is in enrollment. The real money is in, and I'm again getting ahead of myself. You are running a unit which is offering a service that people are willing to pay for or not. And the fastest way, I'll tell you here at Oregon State, our online eCampus program is increasing on the order right now of 25% per year enrollment. It probably won't sustain itself. It's partly COVID related. But it has amazed me how slow US planning programs have been to get into the online space, given the nature of what we teach, particularly at the master's level. And I know we're going to have some discussion about that later, but I actually think your best and fastest route to revenue growth is actually to shore up your enrollment. And that is often going to require adjustments in your modalities. And that's hard to do. I don't understate how difficult it is to get faculty to think about different modalities. But on the fundraising side, that is a slower game. It's a really important game, but it's not your immediate term. I mean, I'll tell you at OSU, we have many units which are teaching the same way they always did, delivering the same programs they always did, and watching their enrollment slowly slip away. Yet we're paying faculty and staff in those units. So we have to think about how do we actually draw more people into what we're doing.
Ed, could I ask a question, or do you want to save them for the end?
No, go ahead.
So I'm curious, it sounds like you guys are on some sort of RCM or some model based on student credit hours, and that may be true for many people here. We're operate in a world where there's no clarity about the budget model at the provost level, at the dean's level, and at the department level. And I'm curious if you can speak to that uncertainty on some level where the objective function is completely undefined.
Yeah, I'll see. Well, the first thought, Noreen, is that is so whacked. You know, it is just so wrong. It's so wrong because one, it is not consistent with the principles of shared governance. So let's just start there. But two, you know, people talk about universities being like aircraft carriers. You try to turn them, it's really slow, and all the sailors get a vote. The problem with that model, and it's a very traditional one, because administrators come to believe that one, faculty should be protected from these bad financial news. That's one defense I've seen for it. Two, it gives them more latitude. I was talking to one of our deans recently who has come over to the transparency side of the camp, but had told me, you know, for years I believed that complete non-transparency was the right way to manage budget. You're going to have a hard time getting faculty to make changes, renovations, innovations, adjustments if they don't understand the underlying financial reality. And I don't necessarily think RCM models are necessary to getting there. We have a modified RCM. It's a very soft RCM here. I actually implemented it when I came here a couple of years ago. They'd been working on it for years, and we finally made the decision to implement it. But as I tell our faculty, when they say, well, you know, the budget model hurts my unit or whatever, I said, we've always had a budget model. The question is the budget model in the provost's head, or is the budget model laid out in terms that our faculty can understand what's driving things? I can tell you, if we didn't have a modified RCM budget model, which considers a number of things, it considers things like, you know, how many enrolled students you have, what your graduations numbers are, what your rates are, your success in producing those students. It has an element for research, which is a little bit unique. So we look at those different factors, and the budget model pushes the money out. And really all it is, you know, honestly, if I eliminated the budget model here and I just made the decisions myself, I'd look at the same things. What else would I look at? So in my view, what I like about the budget model is it says to our faculty, it says to our department heads, it says to our deans, here are the things we're looking at. If you're in a situation where you don't know this, I don't have immediate advice on how to navigate that context, other than to say, you've got to, I believe you would need to start arguing to your dean and to others that this has got to be made transparent. It really does, because we can't, I don't know how you inspire change in your faculty to create the kinds of dynamic programs you need to in an increasingly tuition dependent world without them knowing what you're up against.
And Ed, can you explain what an RCM model is?
Yeah, responsibility centered management models are basically the concept. The pure RCM is your unit floats on its own bottom. And so you produce revenue from tuition and fees, from indirect cost recovery on research grants, maybe from some other activities. And that's your revenue driver. And then you have a set of costs. And, you know, some universities have very pretty heavy RCM. Michigan's a good example of this. It's a common example cited, where the colleges are very independent, drive their own revenues, absorb their own costs. It puts them in control. And so on the one hand, it's kind of a control model. You have latitude to adjust as you wish, but it's also a responsibility model in that you're accountable when things go south, your budget falls. And the reason public universities have gone to it pretty heavily is to try to get action, get movement, get incentives. You know, we did it because we didn't think our units had enough attention on student success. We wanted them focused on making sure that once students matriculated at OSU, that they actually completed successfully, and the budget model rewards units for that. Don't just take them in, weed them out, send them off to some other part of the university or drop out of OSU. Now, what's interesting is now our units are intensely focused. If they get a student, they want to keep that student, they want to have that student succeed. That's why you go to that model. But most hybrid, or most RCM models are kind of a hybrid. They basically look at your enrollments and your completions and some other factors, and they attach weights to those, and then they flow revenue based on your outcomes to your unit. It's typically to the college, not to the department. So for example, University of Illinois, we pushed the money to the college, and the college decided how to allocate from there. So let me, I know you have more questions, but let me show a couple slides, and I'll just, because we've covered some of this, I don't want to go on and drone on here too long. But I did want to have a chance, so I'm going to try to share my screen to frame some of this for you. Okay, I think that sharing, somebody give me a nod, Donna, or is that sharing okay? Okay. All right, so let me just try to give you kind of a framing for some of this that might be helpful for your own thinking. When I think about budgeting, people often think about the last of these three things, resources. I tend to think of them about really more the weight on the first two, organization and strategy. So the resources, the sources of funding that you have or that you produce, which may or may not be apparent to you if you're in a world, say, like Noreen sounds like she's in. But that tends to be where people focus. I get a budget, I figure out how to spend it. We need to back that up and talk about these other two things. So let me just make a couple comments about organization. What do I mean by that? What I mean basically is that you have to recognize that your department is an organization, right? You know, what's interesting to me when I talk to department chairs sometimes, they don't like to use these terms. It sounds a little corporate. Basically, you're the leader of an organization, and you've got to think about how you create the kind of organization that is what I would call tuned to making continuous change in a context of shared governance. You're going to, you know, the pace of and degree to which we need to innovate within the universities, especially as, again, I come back to, we're increasingly tuition sensitive. we're increasingly undergraduate tuition sensitive. And I think to a growing degree, we'll be increasingly sensitive to tuition generated through professional master's programs that are net revenue positive. You've got to create the kind of organization that will support that continuous change. And in my view, there is no way you'll get there without what I call financial literacy. Your faculty have to know what you're facing and what the college is facing and what the university is facing. This is why I described the situation that Noreen described as whacked, because you can't get there. I mean, faculty are smart people. If they know the facts, they're going to be a lot more inclined to thinking about making the kinds of changes and adjustments that you may need to see happen in order to create more competitive programs, more attractive programs with higher net revenue. And, you know, my faculty here, they often, some of them, not all, but they'll often say, well, Ed, you talk way too much about academic programs and the importance of being sensitive to enrollment and that kind of thing. Do you really care about research? And I find it to be one of the most frustrating questions I get, because one key reason I care about those things is to keep the research engine afloat. Because the other interesting thing people don't know about research is it's a net revenue loser. If you do the numbers right, you're losing money on funded research. And so we don't do research to produce revenue. We do research because it's our mission. But our primary driver of that is actually on the academic program side. So when I think organization, I'm thinking, okay, how do I create a unit that can actually do budgeting well? Well, that means they've got to be able to change. They've got to be able to make change. And I think transparency and financial literacy are big pieces here. I mentioned that you had to be a leader of your unit. You have to be a leader in the university, of the college as well. That's understanding how your unit fits into that bigger entity. And you have to get a lot more comfortable, I think, with proactive direction. And this is an area where chairs struggle because they think, well, my job is to get a sense of the faculty and reflect that and try to build consensus. And shared governance dictates that I respect the will of the faculty. And my answer to that is not if they're driving the unit down the drain. And what you're going to have to get comfortable with is going back and having hard discussions about, you know, we need to change this. We need to adjust what we're doing. And you'll have to put as much pressure as you can get away with to get the kinds of changes in place that need to happen. All of this requires really effective communication, especially around the financial literacy piece. A common problem we see in universities is that unit heads, deans, and provosts put out long, complicated financial tables and argue that that's transparent. You can see the numbers, but what they don't do is think about how do I convey that information so that the critical, most salient points are clear to the faculty. And you have to do that as a unit head when you explain your budget to them. And when you're thinking about, you know, where do we get our money? And when I say where do you get your money, approximately you get it from the dean probably. But what really is driving it are other things, your actual activities. And you've got to try to work with your college so you can clarify those and explain them to the faculty very clearly. And that's having faculty recognize the tuition earnings they may be producing, the indirect cost recovery they may be producing, and so on. It's hard to understate how confused people are about how money moves around the campus. I mentioned the School of Music earlier. I can remember one of my first meetings with our School of Music at Illinois when I became dean, and somebody asked me, how do we help the School of Music's budget? how do we get more money? And I said, well, you could support what the School of Architecture is doing. And you could have heard a pin drop in that room. Usually they were competing with each other. And, you know, it took us time for them to understand that their fate was tied to the units that were producing revenue. They didn't have any understanding of that. In fact, our School of Music thought it was a big revenue producer for the university. So it requires really good communication, regular communication about what's going on. So organization is your first step. Build a good organization. And if you don't have a good financial staff, or one person, or, you know, if you're not a big unit, it might be just one, might be a part of a person, you've got to make sure you have that. Build relationships. If you have a shared business office, build relationships with that office, get to know those staff. They often don't get a lot of respect, and department heads that do reach out and build good relationships end up getting really good support from the business staff on the campus. So the second piece I wanted to just talk about was strategy, and you're all planners, so it's like preaching to the convinced. This is an easy part, but you know, the other part here is if you don't have a strategy for the future of your unit, you can't budget. As I mentioned earlier, the action isn't in your immediate spend for a given year because you have very little latitude there. The action is the additional resources you might be able to attract because you've got a plan for the unit that appeals to the college and to the university, and that reflects the challenges the college and the university are facing. And this is why strategy just becomes really important. And I wanted to show you one source I use and just have found useful over time, but one can find many different ways of framing how we think about strategy and strategic planning. Obviously, some of you probably teach it, but one I like is by Richard Rummelt at UCLA, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And it frames it, I've found over time, particularly for people who don't really understand strategic planning or strategy, or maybe want to kill themselves when they hear the word strategic planning, that this actually kind of resonates with them. And basically what he says is, you know, think of strategy as first a valid diagnosis. It's a diagnosis of a challenge or opportunity that reduces complexity. And it provides an explanation, and it identifies a domain of action. This is the most important part. I was giving you a diagnosis of what the universities are facing when I talked about how important student demand is and how important understanding tuition flow is. It's a diagnosis of where higher ed is going. Is it right? Is it wrong? What are my facts? What's my reasoning? This is what I mean by when you present a diagnosis about what your unit is facing in enrollment, or the research challenges you're trying to take on, or the opportunities. Giving your rationale becomes a really important part of the conversation, particularly from a shared governance standpoint. And by the way, writing it down becomes really important because, you know, as scholars, when you write stuff down, the logic of your thinking becomes apparent, or the illogic. So it's important to have a written strategy. Rummelt talks about guiding action policies, framing policies. For example, a university going to an RCM model might be described as a kind of a channeling action. It's creating incentives. And then specific actions that are coherent and coordinated. And I just want to add, show you an example of what I mean by this. And it's been a while since I've done a strategy for a department, as you might imagine, but let me give you an example. At Oregon State, we just finished strategic plan a couple of years ago. And one of the places we started was we said, okay, what are the disruptors out there in higher education? And we talked about things like stabilizing college going rates. Those have really stabilized in the US. When you couple that with slowing enrollment growth, you can see what will happen. The universities are seeing less demand in many cases, especially in regions like the Midwest and the Northeast. Distrust of the public, we talked a lot about that as a disruptor in higher ed. Skepticism for a variety of reasons, and that higher ed is becoming a kind of transactional or commodity good. So our our board of trustees spent a lot of time talking about these kinds of disruptors. Digitization of big data, right? We talked about it before, but in a Zoom world, in a pandemic world, we're now realizing just how much the world is changing in terms of what we might make use of digital technologies. So the details here are less important than kind of the bigger point, which is, to form the strategy here, we thought a lot about disruption out there in the world and what the university is trying to respond to. Some of that were things like, why are people questioning higher ed? Partly because they can't afford it any longer. They're losing their confidence that their children will be able to go. They're therefore less supportive of politicians willing to vote support for public higher ed, and so on. So these were kinds of the things we were thinking about from a disruption standpoint. And that led to a whole set of implications. So that diagnosis led to a bunch of implications. And these were the kinds of things our board said, okay, we need to write a plan to address. The reason I put this out here is a lot of these things are things that affect the budget of the university, the revenue, the financial position, the ability to do good things. Almost none of these things fire up the faculty. They don't care about this, right? They don't really, they might have they're concerned about the effect of the cost of higher ed on students, sure. But a lot of these are about the university as an organization, a nonprofit business, if you will, within the context of a changing sector. That's the kind of thing a board has to worry about. But what faculty care about are things like this. What are we going to do? What challenges are we going to tackle? So coupled with thinking about the dynamics in the world out there that we're dealing with financially, we also thought a lot about what is it substantively we want to do as a university to respond to what's needed in terms of the work we do as scholars and as teachers and so on. And that led to a lot of conversations around these kinds of things. This is what fires up the faculty. Your challenge as a chair, when honestly it comes down to that you find a way to turn that financial piece and picture and understanding, mesh that with the substantive discussion of what the reason we got into this work to begin with taking on challenges that require scholars to solve. And you turn that into a story for your unit. And that story is your strategy. That strategy is your story. What are we going to get accomplished? What are the financial challenges we need to respond to? How do we respond to those? And then how do we position the unit to be stronger? If you have a really compelling story, as I said early, and it reflects your understanding of what the university faces, first your college and then the university, and then you go to your dean and you say, we need some investment to do X, Y, and Z. And that story is, again, compelling in terms of addressing the challenges and creating opportunity. Many deans will invest. Smart deans will invest if they're able. And if deans can't and deans go to provosts, smart provosts will invest. I can tell you the number of times units came to me when I was a dean with this kind of framing was very rare. One was particularly strong, and they pitched their whole plan around very real enrollment challenges they had ignored for years. But they did it in a way that sought to develop new expertise and new areas of specialty, but they took on some challenges with their faculty that they'd been sweeping under the rug, changes they needed to make in how they taught and who they taught. And they recovered their enrollment growth after we made an investment in that plan. That's what your dean's trying to do. Right? They're trying to build a portfolio of successful programs. You are one of those programs. So when I think about budgeting, I'm not immediately running to the sources and uses of funds. I'm thinking about how's the organization set up and configured to make good change, to deliver good programs, and what is its strategy for delivering on those things. And then, of course, you get to the question of resources. And again, as I say, this is where you've got to know your sources and uses, or at a minimum, you have to know how your dean understands your sources and uses. And the best way to get that is probably not from your dean, because honestly, some deans are confused about that. So your business offices become really important. Know the model, and I put that in quotes. We were talking about RCMs earlier. Know the model for distributing resources in your university. From it, actually, you can start at the state. How, if you're public, how does the money come from the state? And then how does it go to the colleges? And then how does the college push it to the units? And in some places that will be an RCM from the university level to the college, and then kind of a discretionary decision from the college to the unit. In some places, they'll push the RCM all the way down to the unit. Many private universities, that's a very opaque and hidden set of decisions. And so in those cases, your only option, I think, is to really understand and get a good relationship with your dean. What is it you need to do to be successful in the mind of your dean if they're not making these things transparent? The other big picture point I'd make on resources is there is no single solution to your budget challenges or creating more revenue to create or capture opportunity. Honestly, there are just a lot of small and medium actions. Using your teaching resource to maximum advantage, putting people in the right courses, balancing teaching loads. If you have people who aren't teaching at a level they need to be, get them teaching at the level they need to be, right? That's a small action. Making sure what limited resources you have are used to maximum effect. So it's usually not, there's no magic bullet. You might get lucky and go get a great endowment. Somebody makes a big donation. That's extremely rare. Usually it's a matter of optimizing your resources you have and creating a case at your level is creating a case at an upper level for more investment. Okay, so this is just a summary. Budgeting, good budgeting in my view is these three things and a lot more weight on the first two. The last is really important. But for example, it's amazing to me when you go in on an accreditation and you talk about what's their strategic plan and they're like, well, we haven't really had an updated one for 5 years or something. Well, what are you doing, right? What are the objectives? Whether you have a strategic plan or not, maybe is less relevant to you. You should be able to articulate what the strategy of the unit is. So let me stop there and just see if you have questions. And then Renia, I think we were thinking about breakout groups, right, at about in a few minutes.
We were, and let's see if anyone has immediate questions. And then there is, in the chat, there is, Betsy made a comment about participatory budgeting. And so it'd be great to hear a little bit about what they're thinking about as well in that area. But are there immediate questions to any of what Ed was talking about?
I'll just chime in. I mean, one of my challenges is just like getting the right information. And I can't do it. And I have one staff person who does everything. So for me, my challenge is just tracking and understanding what's coming in and out. And there's so many moving parts, like, oh, did so-and-so transfer that money they said they were going to transfer? And then we forget. And then a year later, oh, they didn't transfer that $100,000. And so, I mean, part of the frustration I have is I'm always bouncing up and down between like the big picture and like, are we getting the money that they said they give us? And then you just get caught up in the details of the bureaucracy and just trying to get everything to work. And so, yeah, like I agree with everything you're saying, but at the same time, it's hard sometimes to do some of that bigger picture thinking. I constantly am forcing myself to like say, who cares? Just, you got to look up higher and make sure that you're following what's going on up top. But it's really challenging when you know, we're struggling to get someone reimbursed from $100 from, you know, May, and they need my signature, and then we didn't fill out the right form, and you know, so this is the sort of pressure I feel like all the time. It stresses me out, and you know, so I just wanted to put the reality check in this conversation.
Yeah, no, it's very true, and most of our universities aren't configured to give you the tools to actually do what I'm talking about here. We're still trying to get it done at OSU. You know, we have something we call a university financial management initiative underway right now, where we're trying to build user-friendly tools for department heads and deans to manage financials, not complicated banner-based, you know, so complicated you can't follow them tools, but really boiled down to the kinds of data and reports and that are tuned to the decision making we're looking for departments to make with their faculties. I think what we're all feeling, it doesn't help you, Stacy, but I think what we're all feeling in higher ed is for so long, especially post-war, universities were largely running on incremental budgeting decisions. And each year you'd get this allocation. And for many years, it was relatively stable. In fact, I remember when I became head at Illinois and opened up the files, and some of you know Lou Hopkins, but Lou always meticulous about keeping his files. So I open up the files and I read these letters from the dean, and they say things like, well, dear Lou, sorry, it was a bad year. We can only send you a 5% increase in your budget. I can't remember a year in which I had a 5% increase. Every year I was dealing with less money. When we were in that world where it was relatively stable, what that led the universities to do, I think, was get complacent, and we didn't build these tools. And so now we're sort of herky-jerkily getting to a world where you guys can actually manage well. So I don't have an answer to your problem other than great sympathy. And I'll tell you, getting change in this area, just fighting the battle on our university finance and administration side, that itself is a delight. So for those of you who become provost someday, you'll get to fight battles like that.
Can I interject a comment about budget models? I mean, I understand the value of what you call RCM. We just sort of talk about it as the budget model, the bucket model at Cornell. When it was first implemented following the 2012 or 29 to 12 recession, it was about transparency. So we really understand where the money is. Now what it is it's a way to pit department against department and college against college for revenues. And so for programs like planning, which seek to be interdisciplinary, it becomes very difficult if you're, on the one hand, trying to maximize the opportunity for the students to take advantage of the resources of the university. On the other hand, you're told every time they do that, we're hemorrhaging dollars.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you, Jeffrey. I don't love them. They are blunt instruments. And to give you an example of this, we had an RCM model at U of I, and as a dean, I fiddled around for about a year trying to figure out if I should push the model to the unit level. And I realized that that was a really bad idea. There was no way we could create an algorithm or set of weights that would properly respect the different modalities and technologies, if you will, to use an economist term, sorry, of the different units. So there I had urban planning and landscape architecture and a School of Art and Design and a School of Music, a Department of Dance, Department of Theater, Performing Arts Center, and a museum. Well, each of them very different. Our dance program took a lot of money relative to revenue, But if you're going to deliver dance, that's how it is. And on the other hand, our architecture program could deliver a lot of degrees for less cost. What we ended up going to was just a transparency kind of approach. We would show each unit each year, this is where your revenue came from. And that is how it was generated and came to the college. And then we'd say, well, here's your cost. And then I would put the cost over the revenue. And I would say, okay, dance, your ratio is 2.8. Architecture, your ratio is 0.5. And what we'd like to do, we're not going to drive everybody to 1. That's ridiculous, right? It's not how they work. But we would occasionally say to dance, you know, we need to get that ratio down a little bit. You guys are consuming so much revenue, you're actually hampering the architecture school's ability to be successful because we have to move so much money from them to you. And it was that transparency that got our unit heads, I think, to a place where they at least understood a little better how they all interacted. But then we could have conversations about, well, you know, let's do a interdisciplinary X. And let's understand what the implications of that program would be. None of that requires a model, weights, algorithms, or anything else, but it does require transparency and good information about costs and revenues. The reason why I think universities have gone to RCMs largely is because managing that is really hard at the university scale. And so they basically opt for the blunter instrument. And there's a lot of risk to it. I have to say at OSU, we've had it in place since 2018. I think it's created, our units are definitely, they care more about student success than they did before, but part of me says, I almost would rather go back to a world where I gave them the information and I told them this is how I'm going to allocate the resources. And I'm going to look at student success. It effectively be like the model, but give me a little more latitude, not force me into an algorithmic box, because then I can't do the kinds of things you're talking about. So RCM models are definitely can be criticized. I agree with you there.
I have a follow-up question to that. And first, thanks for doing this for us. This is very useful. At Virginia Tech, we have a model like this where each college floats on their own. And they have translated this in a faculty to student ratio, so that how many students we have per faculty member. And we are a graduate program, and we look pretty bad because we don't have many undergraduate students. And so the whole system seems to be stacked against graduate level programs. Do you have any thoughts on how that can be worked out or has been worked out elsewhere? Because I think all of us are chairs of graduate heavy programs.
Yeah, this is why I don't like an RCM that's quite that hard, because it doesn't reflect the fact that units make different kinds of contributions. The only answer I have to that is discretion. You can never take discretion out of the equation. I mean, that's what your provost and your dean should be doing. It's the discretion you're applying with what limited latitude you have at the departmental level. But for example, here, I'll take Oregon State. Our most prestigious unit is our College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences. It's a legitimate competitor to Scripps and Woods Hole. It costs a fortune. If we look at, we operate research vessels for the Pacific Ocean under contract with NSF. Very costly to do this. But it is our signature program. And we produce really talented climate scientists. And so when I look at that college, I'm thinking about what is the net value of that? And it's not purely financial. That's only part of the picture. So, we subsidize that college at a pretty heavy rate, but at the same time, I do go to that college often and say, listen, our capacity to subsidize you means that I don't kill the College of Business, because we need them to produce the revenue that will help sustain. And the College of Business, honestly, they get it, because they'll say, Well, we get the reflected glow of being one of the leading research universities in climate science. So this is where these kinds of rigid budget models are misguided. And so for planning programs, I think the only solution I have for your graduate heavy programs is to continually make the case to your university leaders about the value you're producing. Often they're not going to be understanding if they're adhering to these rigid models, I'm afraid. And I don't have an easy fix for that.
There's a question in the chat from Jennifer about any thoughts on tuition differentials for professional programs. And just in that context of thinking about business, I just like the reflection on that as well, because something that I know I feel often at UNM is the business school has been very good at having one-year programs, executive programs, certificates, and generating a lot of revenue. And that keeps being offered as an example. And yet we're really actively trying to attract students who are going to be change agents and fighting for social justice. But then differential tuition is like, hey, if you make more money, because it comes back to the school, and it's sort of seen as this stopgap. And yet and then I look at our alums, working for nonprofit organizations and think of the burden of additional tuition and student loans. So.
Yeah, so my thoughts there, I think it's never an either or, but I will say it's easy to conclude, and a lot of units do this, that we shouldn't be the unit that worries about tuition revenue, because this is what we do. We do X, Y, and Z, and it's really valuable. And we have a lot of units like that. I've got a lot of them, and the problem, it's not that as a dean or a provost you're not sympathetic to that. You are on a one-off ceteris paribus kind of context. You are always sensitive to that, but you're trying to piece together a whole that is financially viable. And so the problem arises when you have so many units that are needing to be cross-subsidized because they can't generate a lot of tuition revenue, and you don't have enough tuition revenue generators. That ends up being a misbalance. And I think planning programs are caught in that a little bit. So to give you an example, our vet med college, if you study veterinary medicine, very weird field. You pay a fortune to go to school, you take on enormous debt, and you go out and earn a lousy salary. It's a really strange, I'm not sure why it survives. It survives because people love their pets and people love to be vets. But honestly, I really worry about those students. They finish with $100,000, $150,000 in debt, and then they go off and earn a $38,000 salary as a local vet. When that college hears an argument of planners, which is we're producing change agents in communities and they can't pay tuition, you can imagine that they might have a lack of patience. So, what do planning programs and programs like it do? Are there ways we can get more accessibility up and costs down? This is why I've been a little frustrated with the slow pace of online learning in the professional planning education space. Because I think if we did more of that and we did it well, and it can be done well, I'm convinced of this. We have a really good program here that focuses heavily on quality. We could reach more students, make it easier for them to earn our degrees without letting their careers take a back seat. And it might open up the financial capacity for them to pay a little bit more net tuition than they have been. Programs are different. I know at U of I, one thing we always strive to do is give every student an assistantship and waive all the tuition. We're kind of proud of that. From the university standpoint, you're sort of wondering, geez, how do you get away with this? It was not sustainable in the long run once the university catches wind of that particular model. How is it that we make a case for a professional degree with waived tuition. That's different than a doctoral degree, PhD degree. But how do you make a case for a professional degree when students in other professional programs are paying a lot for those degrees? I think that's the problem planning programs find themselves in. And again, I would come back to, if it was me as a dean or a provost, it's not either or. Maybe it's a discounted professional tuition, but the net revenue balance is a little bit better. I wouldn't want it, you know, some schools, and I think Michigan might be one of them, I think their planning program is largely fee generating. Other places like Illinois, it loses money. There's a happy medium.
So I have a question. I have a question about university systems, because I've been out of academia a while and I'm, you know, re-entering, and I'm struck by something Stacy said about, you know, the piece of paper tracking through the system and it needs a signature and all that. I'm really already amazed by the administrative loading, resource load, like strategically to have bright people chasing pieces of paper is like not a good strategy. And I'm wondering, how well are universities doing in bringing those systems into line strategically? You know, you shouldn't be spending more than a very small percentage of effort on pieces of paper, in my view.
I think really bad, honestly. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One was we didn't have to for a while for reasons I mentioned earlier. Things were, you know, relatively stable, and everybody wasn't on a razor's edge as far as their budget. And I remember when I first became dean, the previous dean said to me, you know, the way I solved most problems was I just threw money at it. You know, I never had a lot of money to throw at problems, so I don't know how that worked, but our relatively stable budgets covered up for a lot of sins in how we did things that were very inefficient. And we have the legacy of that built into our institutions. So we use a banner system that's been patched and repatched. And a lot of you, I'm guessing, are using banner systems, or whatever your ERP is. It's probably pretty outdated. All that infrastructure in the backside to manage things like paper moving around or track financial data and other things, those systems are often very antiquated. They typically cost $30 to $50 million to upgrade. And this is why universities don't upgrade them. They don't have the money, so they let them get worse. And then we beat on the heads of department heads to use their resources more efficiently. We need to do more reinvestment in our business systems to bring them up to standard and make it easier for our managers to make good decisions. It's more critical than ever that managers have the flexibility to make good decisions and the tools. And you really don't, I'm guessing most of you really don't have very good tools, sadly. I'm not propping you up much. Oh.
Well, and one thing I want to point to everyone is that Betsy included a resource for participatory budgeting in the chat, but also maybe at that moment ask Betsy, do you have anything that you would just like to say about what the conversation there?
Well, I was just elected 4 days ago to be the chair or the director of the graduate program of urban planning at UMass Boston. So I can't give you a lot of information. We only had one conversation so far about it, but it really is something that Ann Forsyth has at Harvard has implemented first at department and then throughout the whole college. And so that's what sort of sparked my interest. And then also at the Great Cities Institute at UIC, they have a huge department, a full-time person involved in doing that at the different parts of Chicago, the different areas of Chicago. So I'm still trying to get a better sense of how we can do it in the school, but the dean seems to be interested. And so we'll see how it goes, and I can report back once I've gotten a little bit further into it. But I think it's an empowering process, because it is definitely overwhelming and it is oppressive in some ways, but anyway, to sort of get folks involved in getting to know the numbers and being responsible and engaging with the process, I think makes everyone feel a little better and smarter about what we need to do and what we can do and what we're gonna spend our money on. So I can get back to you once we move forward, if we are able to. I hope we will.
One of the things just to say, to give you a little bit of solace in this, because it can be a frustrating area, is I think all of us in these roles right now we're in a period of transition in higher education and how we deal with resources and so on. And the pressure that you put on the institutions to make change, and maybe in line with some of the principles and ideas that Betsy just referenced, that's really important. We put the University Financial Management Initiative in place here, where we're trying to retool our tools to put more information in the hands of unit leaders and faculty, because of frustration on the part of our units that they could not, we talk about strategy and blah, blah, but they can't get the work done. So the only kind of solace I can give you is you're actually going to help lead that change in how you manage your units. And that part hopefully will make you feel like you're creating better conditions for people that follow you, if you're not in the fortunate position of having these tools now.
Well, and maybe that is a good moment for us to transition. So what we were intending to do now is go into breakouts, just so there's a few minutes to talk about what you're doing. And maybe that is about how you're thinking about these strategies or what seems possible, and sharing some of that experience at here. Since I'm in New Mexico, it would be 11 o'clock, so 10 o'clock Pacific time. Then we would take a break. And then at 15 minutes after the hour, we're going to have a panel with, and Stacy's going to be one of the presenters, Ted Hahola, Chris Silver, and Jim Spencer, about everybody talking about how they're trying to do things that were sort of innovative in different ways around either using resources to really how to target resources to recruit diverse students, how to starting an online program like they did at University of Florida. Ted Hahola started the Indigenous Design and Planning Institute, and how he fostered support for that and established that. And then Jim Spencer, certainly in his previous role, he is now at LSU, but when he was at Clemson, they had a number of different programs that they were able to do get some revenue, have this agreement that they got revenues from certain programs and could use that for other things. So just some ways that what's gone on in some different planning programs to generate revenue in ways and be able to direct it towards meeting objectives that we want to meet. So that will start at 50 minutes after the hour, whatever hour you are in. And right now we only have about 20 minutes. And so I think what we will do is just ask, Donna will put us into breakouts, and it'll just be everyone dropped into that. And it will only be for about 20 minutes. There were a few kind of prompt questions, but I like the idea of really focusing on like, what is it, like how you're thinking about what you can accomplish and strategies at your institutions. But of course you can talk about anything, the frustrations or challenges. There were 3 questions, one about transparency and about being transparent, strategy, and alignment, like thinking about your unit and align with university goals and mission. And all of those are important questions as well. But perhaps we will maybe we can all thank Ed for talking us through this now.
Thank you all.
Thank
And
you.
thanks for the work, again, you're doing as chairs. It's really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we'll go into breakouts. And I know sometimes, because I do this as well, that people are like, oh, right now is not the moment I'm going to join that conversation, but please do join us 15 minutes after the hour. It's really great stuff that, our colleagues are doing. And so a good moment to talk about it. So please come back and join us back here. Good afternoon, everyone, and let's get started. And there will be a few more people we're expecting to join us, but they can jump in when they come. I know that some of you are here this morning, and so you introduce yourself. So perhaps everyone can introduce yourself in chat again so that we know who's here. And, I know that many of us know each other, but not everyone has met. As we get started, I'd also like to say a little bit about the Administrators Conference in March. It will be a Thursday afternoon or evening, depending on which time zone you're in, and all day Friday. The Thursday afternoon will be a panel and a discussion with people who have gone into administration and are now administrators at a level other than chair. And Friday sessions, we have, like with this, having an abbreviated, like a shorter version of the Administrators Conference because of the time we're all spending on Zoom, because of the challenges to really whittle away whole days when you're working at home. We've decided to focus on two really important sessions. We're going to have one session on globalizing the planning curriculum. And so, yes, I mean, we'll have one session on that, and that is going to be, that is organized by the Global Planners Educators Committee. And the second will be on anti-racism leadership in planning departments. And so we really encourage you to, block out that time for, that will be on Friday, March 12th for the Administrators Conference. And then, sorry, I'm distracted by people continuing to come in the room. But so this afternoon, I'm very happy that we are going to get to have a presentation that I know I heard when I started as chair, and I very much valued it, by Tim Chapin. And Tim is the Dean in the College of Social Sciences and Public Policy and a professor of urban and regional planning at Florida State University. But before he became dean, he also served as chair for, I think, 6 years. Is that right, Tim? Was chair for 6 years, and then also the associate dean for development in his college. And so he is going to be talking about the formal and informal roles of chairs. And this is a presentation that I certainly learned a lot from when I first heard, but I've heard it since then. And I learn a lot every time, because sometimes, as a chair, we're just so busy doing things. We're not always reflecting on all the different kind of questions and demands that are coming from different directions. And so very much have appreciated thinking through, the reason why we're in this situation and the role that we play as chairs. Now, if you have questions, add them to the chat or raise your hand. We're a small enough group that you can also unmute yourself and jump in if there's something that you want to ask. I will, try to monitor the chat. And if I see you raising your hand, invite you to ask your question, but don't be shy if for some reason I'm not seeing you or I misinterpreted your question or there's something that you want to add, because it certainly is meant to be a discussion. Following this presentation and discussion, we'll take a short break, and then we're going to have a panel with 4 chairs who've had some experience with being chairs, but are still, have become chairs in the last number of years, and so still knowing the experience of being a new chair and being a more experienced chair. Priyam Das, Sheree Smith, Lisa Servan, and Rolf Pendle. And then we will have a discussion and break out into smaller discussions. So I hope that all of you can participate in both. And with this, I am going to turn it over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Renia. I see lots of familiar faces out there. I appreciate you taking the time to come together and have a conversation with me today. And I do hope that we have more of a conversation rather than me talking at you. Donna and Renya, I'll let you know, you may need to make me a co-host so I can share my screen. I will be putting some slides up there. So just as a heads up. As Renya talked about, I was department chair for 6 years, and I started actually as while I was an associate professor. I was about 3 or 4 years into my associate professor stage in my career. We had some senior faculty that left for other opportunities, and for whatever reason, I was tapped as chair and was there 6 years. I can tell you the best thing I did as chair is I warmed the seat for now an even better chair in the position, Jeff Brown, who's also on this call. I'm a big believer in good leadership transitions, and we've had success in that regard. What I do want to do today is talk to you about what I thought of, and I was asked to do this a handful of years ago, reflect on my time as chair. And what I thought was there was a lot that I knew when I was starting the position, but there was even more I didn't know when I was starting the position. And I was trying to think that through, and I came up with this idea of the formal and the informal roles of the department chair. And that's what I'm going to be presenting from. I've got a slideshow. I'm sure we can share that around as we move forward. As Renya said, if you have questions as we go, please do jump in. I don't want to just talk at you, although I realize we all are used to being talked at on Zoom. So with that said, let me dive into the presentation and see if we can get this up and running. And let me Renya, can you nod and tell me that you can see that okay? Yes, okay, good. All right. So I'm going to be talking about the formal and informal roles of the department chair. My email is here if there are any questions about any of this moving forward. By all means, reach out to me afterwards. I'm happy to try to answer any questions, and I welcome getting to know those of you that I don't know and reconnecting with you of those that I do know. First of all, some really key points to be made, and that is that department chairs are essential to the running of successful universities. And I really do love this quote, and I believe it to my heart. An institution can run for a long time with an inept president, but not for very long with inept chairpersons. And I think that's very true. Presidents shape institutions. We're going through a presidential search here at FSU right now, and it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. But presidents can do great things. They can cause some harm. But if you've got unhappy chairpersons or ineffective or inept chairpersons, you've got inept departments and faculty, and students are suffering. So I've always loved this quote, and I would remind you that there's deep truth in this. You are doing very, very essential work at your institutions. I also wanted to add what I'm going to call the Chapin Corollary. And this is for a book that I'm not yet writing and will never write, called A Beleaguered Academic Administrator's Manifesto. But I really do believe this as well. In my experience, department chair is the best, most rewarding, and hardest job in academic leadership. You are on the ground. You are translating university, and if you're in a college or in a school, college and school directives, down to the level of faculty, students, and programs. You are where the rubber meets the road in terms of the administration of the university. I, to this day, look back on my time as a department chair with great joy and pleasure. I love the job. I miss the job. As I say, Jeff Brown's doing it better than I ever did now, but I really did enjoy that period of my academic career. So I hope you take joy and see how important it is that the work that you are doing, and also understand it is, to my mind, the hardest job in academic leadership, because you're on the ground, you're dealing with day-to-day little problems and day-to-day big problems. So sort of setting the stage, this is important stuff that you're doing, and thank you for taking on this position. So one of the questions, and this is goes back to when when Cheryl and I did this a handful of years ago over in Houston, and she said, this is a good question to ask people, and we're not going to go around the room, and I'm not going to make you answer this, but there is this question: why is it that you're doing this job? And there are a number of typical reasons that come up. One of them is you were late to the meeting. It's the joke, right? You were late to the meeting and all of a sudden you're department chair. That's actually not how we usually choose department chairs. Department chairs oftentimes are chosen or actively pursued by people because they are interested in demonstrating competence and they're interested in being an administrator. I'll be honest with you, that was something that was intriguing to me. I thought I might want to be a higher level university administrator, and a department chair was a good space to figure out if I was good at it and if I could do it. Many of you, I suspect, end up in the position for these next few reasons. You want to contribute to the good of the order. Other people have done the job and you feel like it's your turn, or it's somebody's turn, and maybe it is in fact yours. Many of us step into the position because we think we can do a good job and we have ideas for making the world better for our faculty, our staff, and our students. And you may have wonderful ideas and you're pursuing those. It might very well be that you have seen other people, long-suffering administrators, and you say, you know what, I'm willing to take this one for the team and I'm going to step into the role because I want to lessen this burden on others, and I'll do it for a term or two. And that's another common reason that you see people end up in the chair's position. I can tell you the wrong reason, or the wrong reasons to end up doing it, is because you think you're going to get rich, you revel in power, you think that you can boss everyone around. None of those things are true. You don't get rich. There's not a lot of power, and faculty aren't easily bossed even in the best of days. In fact, they're rarely bossed, if ever. They're begged and cajoled, but never bossed, is at least my experience. So many of you probably got into this job for one of these reasons, or several of these, or others. What I would encourage you to do is that as you move through your time as a department chair, that you think about those reasons, and on those tough days and on those tough times, you remember what it is that pulled you into this, and try to keep that in perspective as you're dealing with the students sitting in your office and weeping because they broke up with their significant other. Because you've got the faculty member railing at you because there were office changes and they ended up with a smaller office than somebody that they think they're quote unquote better than in your faculty, and all sorts of other wacky experiences that I'm sure you've had in your time as department chair. So think about that and be reflective as you move through your time as being department chair. So that's sort of just to warm us up, okay? So being a chair is important. Universities need you, and they need you to do a good job, because without you, the university will fall apart pretty quickly, or at least it will be remarkably inefficient and unhappy. And that you probably are going into this with some purpose, and stay true to that purpose, whatever it happens to be for you. So that's a way of, as I say, warming us up. And again, I'll remind you, if you have questions as we go, I know Renya's monitoring. Renya, feel free to jump in, and other people can unmute and jump in as well. So don't be shy about that. Let me now get into sort of the formal presentation, if you will, the formal roles of the chair. What I've got here is a bunch of slides that lay out what I see as many of the typical, well understood, clearly established roles of a department chair, a unit head. I realize some of you may not be called department chairs. You may be a school director, you may be a program director. I'm going to use the term chair sort of interchangeably. So I know that there are differences out there in the world. The other thing I'm going to observe is that some of these formal roles that I'm going to speak to might not apply to you because other people in the organization do it. It's handled differently within your units. But I do want to hold up that many of these are sort of the expected roles that unit heads play within their units. And these are the things that I think of as an easy part of the job, because people know that this is part of the job. There are responsibilities and systems that are given to you to make sure that you do the job. People are checking your work. You've got friends in HR and budget and making sure that you're doing things the right way. So this is, to my mind, the easy part of the job. And this is what I thought I knew when I was getting into being a department chair. And that is that as a department chair, you do things like be the chief budget officer of the unit. In many universities at the departmental level, the department chair is the local budget officer. You have the responsibility and the expectation to be responsible for your unit's budget, how it spends its funds. You track expenditures with staff. You make, or at least contribute to, financial aid decisions. You're allocating resources for students, and ultimately your name is literally signed when it comes to, as it is here at FSU, things like payroll, things like the allocation of travel funds. Ultimately, the chair is oftentimes the authority for that. So there's some financial control that is expected of the unit head. And I don't think this is a big surprise. Something else that many department chairs or unit heads do is their facilities manager. They oversee and work with staff and faculty on offices and classroom space. They're lobbying for space. And of course, I've got that little hint that you all know already. You always lobby for more, you never lobby for less. You don't tell people you need less space. That's one of those tricks of management. You don't give up money and you don't give up space unless you absolutely have to. Part of your job is to help recommend improvements and investments, technology upgrades. You're supposed to be the ultimate enforcer of the rules in the use of space. So if there's a no food in the computer lab rule, there's a collective enforcement of that. But ultimately, if somebody has to be in charge and be the heavy at the local level, oftentimes the department chair is where the buck stops. So these are common roles that I suspect many of you are taking. You control money, you control space, or you oversee. Maybe control isn't the right word. Other common formal roles. You manage the teaching program. You don't teach every class. You might very well have another faculty member or staff that do a lot of these details, but ultimately, sometimes the teaching program questions, problems, issues rise to the level of the department chair. You oversee the teaching evaluation process. If there are issues with honor code violations, I don't know about your institution, but at many, there's a role for the chair in being a first line in defense and navigating honor code and other behavioral issues. And I'll speak more about some of that in the informal roles in a little bit. Oftentimes, the department chair is a go-to person for dealing with people that are struggling and students that are struggling in the classroom. So you're part of the academic mission and, again, the authority when it comes to the good, the bad, and the ugly of the teaching program. You're also responsible for managing the academic personnel. In many units, not all, but in many, the department chair writes evaluations and undertakes the evaluation process for faculty and in some cases for staff. You're responsible for allocating teaching loads and service assignments and ensuring that people are doing their work. There is a job oftentimes in the promotion and tenure process, not only overseeing that, but ultimately writing a letter. And in many institutions, the department chair has an actual vote that matters tremendously in the promotion of faculty as they work forward in their careers. And of course, there's hiring decisions. Does the chair do every bit of this? Absolutely not. But do they oversee it and ensure that deadlines are met, ensure that university rules are followed? Absolutely. So you're managing a lot of the teaching and program and the personnel, the academic personnel. You're also an HR manager in many cases. Many of you, I suspect, have responsibilities of doing evaluations of people that you didn't have to evaluate before. You're expected to do a good job of that, to understand what the university's norms are, to understand the timing of that, and if there are issues, to work and deal with discipline of staff. I can tell you that when I was a department chair, we lost an outstanding office manager. We brought a new one on board. They were not successful, and I had to hire, and then within about 6 months, have that individual no longer with the department, and in fact fired from the university because they couldn't do the job. I did not enjoy any of certainly that part of it, but that was part of my responsibility as department chair. And HR is something that many of us, we know is a formal role, but don't get a lot of training. So this is one of those, you do end up working with your friends in your human resources office oftentimes to learn all the things that you need to know about the HR side of things. Another common formal role that's a little bit softer is friend raising and fundraising. This is a bigger and bigger deal in higher ed these days. We expect, I can tell you that within the universities, friend raising and fundraising are getting devolved deeper and deeper into the university. We used to think of the president as being a fundraiser, and then we think of the foundation as being fundraisers, and deans as doing fundraising. And increasingly, we're seeing unit heads getting pulled into that sphere as well. So you've got to stay connected with people, and occasionally you get pulled into and asked to help lead fundraising initiatives on behalf of your program, your unit, your college, whatever it might be. And then there's also this expectation on the development side that you, I'm going to say it this way, but you're a team player. You're expected to represent university policy and to speak well and be a booster of the university. You may disagree with some things, and that doesn't mean you can't voice concerns or frustrations, but there's an expectation oftentimes that when you're in a management position like this, that you are part of the booster culture within the university. And I don't mean a football booster or basketball booster. I mean, you say, I like this university and I believe in what we're doing. And we can do better, but you speak a sort of well of the initiatives of the university, at least publicly, we can say. So there's a development side as well, fundraising, and sort of university support. And then the last set of common sort of formal roles is oftentimes you're the external representation for the unit. If there's an expectation that someone needs to represent the unit at a university meeting, at a college meeting, you end up being that person, that you're the head of the unit. So you get to play that role. You oftentimes MC and host events and do customer relations. You've got to put on that smile even on days when maybe you're not feeling it as part of the job. And I always enjoyed, and I say that tongue in cheek, the potted plant events where you're asked to sit in the background at an event and smile and clap when asked and look like you're interested in whatever the event is about. And oftentimes they're really fun events, but sometimes they're not. But those are the types of things that's part of the job. And sometimes we forget that external representation is a very important part of the job. You want the unit to look good to the university, and you're that face of your unit. And then last but not least, and this is a formal role, but the processes vary widely across universities, across programs, as to how visionary a leader, a department chair, or unit head could be. But unit heads are usually expected to, at minimum, be a convener of important discussions, but oftentimes you actually are the ones that set the tone for and literally write the agenda for those conversations and those meetings. You're oftentimes asked to articulate a vision and then pursue that vision and get people on board with it as best you can. What's interesting in many academic units is that the department chair or unit head is this fascinating and very internally inconsistent, where you are the leader of the unit, but you're also an equal in that unit as well. Your colleagues know that you're running the unit and oversee the running of the unit, but they also see you as an equal. On many things, you only have one vote, just like they do. So you're a leader and first among equals, and it's a strange sort of arrangement that you've got. It's very different than the business world or even the public sector, where there's a clear hierarchy and the boss tells people what to do. That's usually not how academia works. So that's the set of sort of formal roles. I think that's right. Yes, as I see it. Let me stop there, take a sip of water, and see if there are any questions about any of those, or any sort of thoughts about anything that we might be missing, that in your experience that unit heads have to do.
Well, Tim, I have a question if you would consider this a formal role. Something, I have now been chair at 2 institutions and I'm in my 9th year. I also became chair as an associate professor, which is, which can be challenging. But something that I have increasingly thought is that the role of chair is to elevate the work of their faculty and their faculty's, insight and expertise to really, and kind of bring that forward, create the conditions for their faculty members to thrive. And I don't know if you would consider that a formal role or informal role or either.
I'm going to say yes, Randy. Great question. I think it's a little bit of both. Actually, there's a formal role in that part of the job of a department chair is to support their faculty and students and staff in any way that you can within the rules of the institution, within your financial base, and the work they're doing. You want their success is your success. One of the ways that I've sort of talk about, and it's very bumper stickery, but when you're department chair, you go from a me person to a we person. And there are formal responsibilities for that. The unit, as it shines, you shine as well. So there is some formality to it. You're writing evaluations, you're helping to tell the story of your faculty, your students outside of the both within the department, but also outside of the department. If you ever get that opportunity to sit next to the president of the university at an event, you're always going to have 2 or 3 stories that you mentioned. Faculty member X, we're doing this really great thing, or we've got some students working in a community in a part of town that we've never worked in before, or whatever it might be. So there is some formal role in that. When I get to the informal roles, I'm going to talk about being a cheerleader, and that's and I don't mean that in a gendered way, folks. I just mean that you're there to cheer on behalf of your unit, that you are there to tell the story and to really big up people and the work they're doing. So Renya, great question. I think it's both. There's some formal expectations built into the external representation, built into the evaluation, the evaluation process, built into the development side of fundraising, but then there's also this softer side, and then we'll get to that when I get to the informal side. So great question, thank you. Any other questions about the formal roles at this point? All right, I'm going to keep us moving then. The informal roles, and again, this is based on my experience, and I'm sure all of you have your own unique experiences and might write about this. Was there a question? I'm sorry. Oh, thought I heard something. Sorry.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, please.
This is regarding the fundraising. So how important is, or let me ask this: what is the how department chair play a role in fundraising? Is it just I mean, should we have fundraising in the department level, or just wait until college level asks us to do something?
So Dayton's good to see you. Another FSU face out there. It varies widely. So I don't mean to suggest that that all of you have. I suspect it varies widely across this group, the amount of fundraising you do. What I will tell you is that in higher ed, increasingly, we need to find resources from new places. And oftentimes alumni and friends are a good way to find resources to get students to conferences, to allow faculty to get access to either a data set or that they maybe not be able to pay for through a grant. Fundraising is getting increasingly important at publics and privates, and I think this is true of all sizes. What I'm reading about, what I'm seeing not just at FSU, but elsewhere is there's a lot of movement towards, there's different levels of types of fundraising, and I won't go into too many details here, but there's annual giving. You try to get to your alums and you say, all of the alums of my school, if you each gave us $25, we would have this amount of money that we could do every year, we could do this. And that's a good way to get some resources, usually for student-oriented activities, not always, but usually. Oftentimes the department chair is the one that helps to lead those efforts, to write the letter, to put together the social media campaign, to work with a development officer, a fundraiser at your institution on that. So there's that side of it, sort of the annual, I'm going to call it give back a little bit or give a lot if you can. But oftentimes with what I find certainly as a dean is that if I find a donor that is really interested in urban planning issues, I will go to Jeff Brown, the chair of the department, and say, hey, can you help work with this individual, and let's get to know them and figure out where their interests are. Sometimes the department chair says, you know what, I'm not the one that is the expert here. We need to get another person involved, and that's okay. But oftentimes the department chair is the one that is the go-between to figure out who it is that you connect a prospect with in the department. So that's what I mean by fundraising. Universities are not to the point, at least most, as best I can tell, where they're sending department chairs on the road to go knock on doors and ask for money. It's not that level yet. I don't know that we'll get there anytime soon. Maybe some of you do that, I don't know, but it's not common that you see that yet. So Dayton, I hope that answers your question. Great, thumbs up, all right. Any other questions on that part, please? Okay. The informal side, again, this is the stuff that I didn't really understand until I got into the job about all the other roles that as a department chair you're supposed to take, that you sort of know it, but people know that you're going to do some of this stuff, but there aren't HR telling you this. There isn't somebody in scheduling saying, here's your deadline. There isn't somebody in the budget office saying, you're running out of money and you better get things in line. I always think of the informal roles as it's almost like the EQ part of the job, the emotional side, and a lot of the team building and culture building part of the job. And it's the tougher part because there aren't rules. There are expectations, though, that you do some of this stuff. And when I think about the informal rules, I think about them in sort of fun little titled ways. First of all, department chair is always expected to be what I call the encyclopedia. You're expected to know everything. Doesn't mean you need to know everything, but people expect you to know everything. And they usually don't expect you to know just everything right now, but the past history of the unit, as long as that history may have existed, and predicting the future of the unit. So you get questions like, hey, what's the curriculum going to look like next year? What does the graduate school allow in terms of transfer credits? Faculty come. And how many articles is enough? What does a PAS report count for promotion? What about a book chapter? I'm third author. How much does that count versus being a solo author? I'm not suggesting that you are expected to have every answer at the ready, but oftentimes you're the authority when it comes to information, even if you just walked into the job 2 weeks ago. What you learn very quickly is that you're real good about answering the questions you know the answer to, but then saying, let me get back to you, and then getting back to you, or finding somebody else who can answer the question for them. But that expectation of staff, of faculty, of students, of alumni, of other chairs, people will ask you, well, in what class do they teach this topic? And you have to go, well, I don't know, but I can find that out. So the encyclopedic expectation to your knowledge base is, I always was amused by it, and you get used to fielding those queries. Another way that you're expected to be superhuman is you're expected to know everybody. There's just this expectation, if you're in the job, you must know everything about the unit, and you must know everyone that interacts with the unit. Who at the Department of Transportation can I talk to about this? Well, I'm not a transportation planner. Yeah, but you're the department chair. Okay, well, let me talk to the transportation faculty. Let me see who I know over there. Let's see what we can do. Students, I've heard of this firm. Do you know somebody there? I'm looking to connect with somebody in the business school, in the medical school, up in student affairs. You're expected to have all these connections at the ready. You don't, and don't expect that you will, and it takes you a while to build your Rolodex, but people will come to you expecting you know everything and you know everybody. And I will tell you that that's never the case, that you do know everything and everybody, but get used to those types of queries if you're an incoming chair. It's remarkable that with the title, they tend to think that there's this USB port that they're able to download all this information into you, and you all of a sudden know everything. When in fact, that's just not the way it works. You have to ask lots of questions. And it's funny, sometimes you'll end up picking up the phone to make a phone call because nobody else will. Even if you go to the faculty member and says, why don't you call over there and ask? And they don't do it. So that's, I was always amused by that expectation that you know all and are connected to all and can see all. You're also expected to be a firefighter and a referee, oftentimes at the same time. I don't know about your institution, but FSU is famous for, I know what time is it here? It's Friday, it's 3:30ish here. I routinely get, when I was chair and now that I'm dean, I'll get an email from my boss, the provost, saying, oh, by the way, we need some information. Can you get it to me by 5 o'clock today? And you know what happens to your Friday afternoon? You end up responding to your job. Sometimes it's the dean, sometimes it's the president, whoever it might be, and you are getting that quick turnaround request. They could have asked it of you 2 weeks ago, but they've waited till Friday afternoon at 3:30 to ask you for it. You're firefighting in that way. You're dealing with the student. You have a morning blocked out to do your research. You've cleared your calendar. You've told your staff to leave you alone. And all of a sudden there's a knock at the door and there's a student who is either as angry as you've ever seen anybody or is weeping in ways that you never thought somebody could weep. And you need to drop everything and you need to put out that fire and give them the attention they need. Why? Because you're the department chair and that comes with the territory. You're expected to firefight that comes with the job. The copier is down, the elevator is not working, the toilet is overflowing. You get all sorts of things. Does that mean you go in there and fix the toilet? No, but you're expected to make sure that the toilet gets fixed pretty quickly. Those are the types of wacky, fun, exciting stuff that all of you went to graduate school and earned your degrees to deal with. Flooding bathrooms and unhappy students and frustrated faculty. That's just part of it. So you're routinely firefighting, and it's just part of the job, and occasionally you just have to smile and go with it. The more pressing, or I would say the bigger issues, are not just the immediate near-term little things that might need attention, but longer-term, bigger issues in which you are indeed the referee. Being the department chair means that oftentimes at the local level, the buck stops with you. If the people are fighting over space, if people are fighting over departmental policy, if people are unhappy over the allocation of resources, oftentimes the department chair is the ultimate authority and has to be the one that makes decisions on these things. What's really strange is that before you were department chair, you didn't have to worry about a lot of this stuff. You could argue your point of view, and then eventually the mess would get cleaned up. Once you become the department chair, all of a sudden the buck stops with you. You have to make the decision. You need to tell the victors on the decision not to celebrate too loudly, and you need to mollify the people that didn't get their way, whatever their way might have been. Another thing that you end up refereeing routinely is student-faculty disputes, unhappinesses. Human beings are wonderful and amazing, and I love the species, but boy, they just drive us crazy now and then, don't they? As a department chair, you get to be the referee for a lot of that stuff. Faculty member X and faculty member Y are fighting over something. They both want the same graduate student on their grant, and you've got to figure out how to resolve those things sometimes. So there's firefighting, the little stuff that pops up, and then there's refereeing the larger disputes, the policy debates, the allocation decisions, and ultimately, oftentimes the buck stops with you, and you need to know that as you own the job. It comes with the territory. I'm sorry, I'll tell you in advance, because you will make people mad, and that just comes with it. But ultimately, oftentimes, you're the one that has to make tough decisions along those lines. I'm going to go through the informal roles, and we'll stop and talk a little bit about whatever you want to talk about in these. You're oftentimes this remarkable mix of being both the local shrink and the law. By shrink, I mean you have people who are human, they're flawed, they have full lives. You have faculty, you have students, you have staff, you have alumni, you have colleagues in other units, and they oftentimes download on you things that as a department chair, they would not download on you otherwise. Or you get brought into situations because of your role as department chair that you wouldn't get brought into otherwise. You've got the junior faculty member that shows up and discloses to you they're having real mental health issues. And you need to, you're not, actually in that case, you're not literally the shrink. You're going to get them the mental health help they require, but sometimes it's, they just need a voice. They need their voice heard, a shoulder to cry on, whatever it might be. You'll have the student that comes to you and their relationship is falling apart. The staff member who received news, I had this experience that they have cancer and they need to come and they just sit in your office, and you need to sort of tell them it's going to be okay when you're not sure it is. This is the type of things that, because of the nature of the position, people come to you. And it's different. Now, I realize as a faculty member, you might very well have many of these same conversations, and people will come to you because you're a caring, loving colleague, and God bless you for that. Thank you. But when it comes to department chair, oftentimes people come to you because you are, in fact, the authority figure, and they want to figure out what to do and how to move forward. So you're oftentimes dealing with people on an emotional level that as a department chair, you did not have to or expect to deal with them as you would as a faculty member. Sometimes it's different. Sometimes it's just outside of your own comfort zone. So be prepared for that. At least this was my experience. At the same time as you are the emotional support for a lot of people, you are also the law. You are the head of the unit, and you are expected to abide by, and I'm going to use the word prosecute, university policy as appropriate. If there are, and I hope you never have to deal with issues of sexual harassment or sexual assault or other misbehavior, but as a department head, you are the law. You oftentimes have to be the one that carries this forward, brings certain things to the right offices, be it to the police department, to HR, to your supervisor, whoever it might be, but you are expected to know and abide by and prosecute the policies of the university, even if sometimes you don't love those policies, because that's the job as a department chair. So the law is actually another one of those, getting back to Renya's question a little bit ago, it's both a formal role. You're expected to prosecute and follow policy, but there's also this informal role that people come to you and they will ask you to do things because you're the unit head that they themselves are unwilling to do and deal with. So you get to deal with honor code violations, grade challenges. Again, have to deal with lots of unhappinesses. I've always said my least favorite part of any administrative job is the people behaving badly category. It's always will be, and I suspect it will be for you, but your job is to abide by the rules of the university and to make sure that the unit, the college, and the university are following their policies and are not putting themselves in a position in which they can be liable for bad decisions. So the university is trusting you to follow the rules in ways that oftentimes faculty, when they're not in those positions, don't have to follow. So understand there's a legal responsibility. That's one of the reasons it's the hardest part of being an administrator. Hardest position is that you're that first line of defense for the university and a lot of the not very good stuff that sometimes happens within higher education. So you're dealing with the emotional side of people and treating them as humans and trying to be compassionate and trying to give them support that they need. But there are also times that you need to be the heavy and you need to be the one that enforces and documents and ensures that university policy is followed when it comes to bad things happening within the unit. The last, I think this is my last set of informal roles. I hinted at one, cheerleader. One of the, I think my favorite parts of any of my administrative roles is the cheerleader. I love when my faculty are doing great things. I love when the students win awards. I love when the alumnus gets FAICP and we get to tell the world about this. There's real joy in that. What you learn very quickly when you become an administrator is that their successes ultimately become yours. Most people, when they enter a chair's role, your research takes a hit. Your productivity comes in second behind all the other duties that happen. You have to take joy and really do take joy in the success of others in this. I find that I like being a cheerleader. I think there's real fun in that and telling the story of in this case, my current case, the college, but when I was department chair, people like Jeff Brown who just do really cool work in the very best journals. I love telling people about that and bragging about him and the other faculty that we've got. That's part of the cheerleading job that I think is formal in some parts of the job, but also very much informal in that whenever you get a chance, you want to brag about your people. It's important to do that. And then last but not least on my list of roles of the chair is I really do believe that a unit head can set a tone for a unit or reset a tone for a unit. How you handle good days and bad days really does shape how the unit handles good days and bad days. When those bad days come, if you start running around with your hair on fire saying the sky is falling and there's no way we can survive this, let me tell you, everyone around you will say, my goodness, the department chair is falling apart. This must be really bad. You know, I need to start looking for a new job. We need to stop doing what we're doing. You know, on the other hand, when those bad days come and you say, okay, we're going to be all right. We can manage this. We can handle this. That's a very reassuring thing. So I believe in the power of unit heads to be great tone setters. That doesn't mean that you can't close the door when you're on your own and put your head in your hands and say, oh my gosh, what a mess. I'm not sure how we're going to figure this out. But we don't do that in public. We certainly don't go out and announce to everyone, boy, this is just, we can never survive this, right? That's just not a good tone setting. This is more my bias, but I think this is very much an informal role of the chair, is how you handle good, bad, and ugly really does set a tone for the unit. So those are my takes on the informal roles of the chair. Let me again take a sip of water and see if there's questions, discussion around this. Rania, you unmuted.
I am unmuted, and I have a few things that actually I would appreciate you reflecting on, Tim. But
Okay, and I see, and then Rania, I'll note that I think Betsy also raised her hand. We'll get to her after you.
So I would actually say that, but what I wanted to say is I didn't want to jump in until others spoke. So Betsy, please go ahead and then I'll follow.
This is, I don't know if Tim, you've seen this anywhere, if anybody else has. We've been having a lot of discussions in the School for the Environment. So it's at the college level, but it's going down to departments about harm reduction policies, processes, committees, paths that are outside of the legal framework. So we would have people that are not responsible, so the responsible people will have to go through Title IX and all that if something happens around race or sex discrimination or sexual harassment. But we've also know that those Title IX processes are horribly awful, agency sucking out of the people who are involved, and they just never really end well. And so we're trying to think about alternative ways that we can set up processes that are not outside of like going against the law, but somehow help students, faculty to figure out harm reduction within the department. And I was wondering if anybody, we haven't done it yet, we're still developing, thinking about it. If anybody else knows of departments who's doing that, especially with Me Too and Black Lives Matter, we really need to figure out, I think, and I'm not alone, obviously, my whole college is thinking about this, how do we be more responsive and I don't know if this is informal or formal. I guess it's kind of informal, but we're thinking of like a committee of people who can sort of hear what's going on and then try to work with everyone involved to try to resolve the situation without going through Title IX, because it's, I mean, in our, you know, as you said, you know, they're trying to cover themselves, prevent their liability, which is, you know, great in some ways, but then it's at the expense of the well-being of the parties involved often. So I'm just curious if anybody, if you, Tim, or anybody else has any ideas about that.
Great question, Betsy. I'm going to see if other people have any thoughts on that. Rather than me sort of chime in, I'm interested to hear if other people have thoughts on that.
Hi, Betsy. This is Kerry Brooks. At my institution, I don't think I would have that choice. I think I'm required to report.
So we have people who are responsible, quote, people who have to report, right? So we would do this with those people who are not responsible. Like, I'm not responsible yet. I don't know, because I just became
we had a
director.
student complaint, and I was told, you know, I talked to student services, and then they were able to talk to our investigative person, and then the student made the choice of what they wanted to do at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would say I think a really important role is about that communication both ways, because with these new guidelines, there has been the new establishment of mandatory reporting for Title IX has come down in a lot of universities, and even at UNM, which I think is a university that's trying to be more reflective. The language we were told we were supposed to put in our syllabus was essentially, I'm a mandatory reporter. And then a lot of people responded and said, that's not what we need to be saying. You know, we need to explain that, but we need to say it in a context that we're really affirming people's experiences and explaining that we are here to support them, and then giving that. And I think that communication has to go both ways. And I say this is an important role for departments like many of our planning departments, because how our work, we're leading with values. And this is something that has occurred many times at or that I have found as chair is our coming from my faculty, sometimes coming from our students. During a Black Lives Matters event, there were snipers on our building, and our students were like, "What?" and wrote a letter to the president and asked us to, as a faculty, write a letter to the president, which we did. And I think that somehow in there's this really important kind of in that communication is also communication. We can't just enforce things. We have to ask about the policies we're enforcing and be part of that conversation. And I do think that that's a critical role of chair, of having that that communication goes both ways. And one thing that did come from that was much of kind of a clearer policy and much clearer even guidance for those who aren't thinking about it as much, about how to do things that were affirming the experience of students, and then also faculty and staff in this as your first obligation as somebody in this, instead of the, our legal responsibilities lead, and then our responsibilities to people come second. And that was something that came from the pushback. So I think that communication both ways is really critical here. But
yeah, I was gonna say, Rennie, you captured a lot of what I was going to say, which is I think faculty more generally, but department chairs in particular, have a responsibility it's very much in opposition. You're expected to prosecute policy. You're expected to follow and use policy as it exists, but you also need to use your bully pulpit to advocate for better policy and changes as necessary. I will say, because I need you, I think it's important that I say this and that you hear this, is I would urge you as units, units don't get to set university policy. Units do not get to choose which, what parts of the university sexual harassment policy to follow and not. I would urge you to be very, very careful and to make sure that you are working with the university leadership and particularly the legal office to make sure that you're coloring within the lines of what's allowed and not allowed, in part because there's all sorts of issues for universities, for the department, for individuals involved. But Rennie, you're sort of underlying, and Betsy, you sort of hinted at this as well. Ultimately, the goal is to treat people well, or as best we can within the strictures that we're working in. So I hear you, but I would be careful. If you don't get to set those policies. You can influence them. You can speak truth to power about them, but you have to be careful. You don't get to set new policy, I guess, as I want to make sure I say. Renia, did you have another question?
Well, I had a question that I feel like is related. And it is one that there is maybe less clear university policy about. And this is how we as chairs are obligated to really understand how racism is being perpetuated in our units and at our university. And I think that that's something that, that's something I know actually something that's happening in a lot of departments right now. And as we have new chairs, there's this power differential between senior faculty and many who are much less mindful of, particularly white senior faculty who really don't understand racism and would rather not learn. And then younger faculty who are having to navigate this, and then people being chair, and there's still these faculty members who are senior and unresponsive, and it plays out in many ways. I mean, certainly we know, microaggressions, interactional, but also about how resources are allocated, who gets TAs, teaching assignments, who's picking up service, all these pieces. And so I think that is, and so that real question on how do we make this explicit as a role of chair, but also making sure that in a way, let's call it a new generation of chair, which I am no longer in this, that have the support also as chairs, so they're not undermined as they're coming into positions, and being much more vocal and aware of how, how racism is operating, and then, possibly being undermined intentionally or unintentionally by by even senior faculty in their departments, but also by the structure within their university, which is probably slower to change. And I think this is true in many departments, but I think in planning, many planning departments are thinking about it more than in some, at least that's my experience at UNM. So that this is also, particularly for planning chairs, I think really critical about having the skills and thinking about that.
Ren, you completely agree. Planning is actually, to my mind, is certainly in my college, a leader in this regard. And I think we see that part of the disciplinary history, some good and a lot not so good in dealing with issues of race and gender and sexuality and identity. We're a little bit further along that journey as a discipline. So I think you're right. You know, so you sort of raised this. This is a Winter Administrators Conference. There's a whole nother day to talk about this very topic, which is, you know, how do you support chairs? How do you navigate older, oftentimes much more likely to be white male faculty versus younger generations of a more diverse set of faculty on all the dimensions that we talk about, sort of demographic diversity, and even sort of the work they do. So I hear you. I'm not quite sure. I guess let me shut up and I'm interested to hear what other people have to say about this. And I'm actually going to stop sharing because this is such a good prompt that I don't want. Let's get away from the slides and talk about this. Renia, let me put it back on you. How have you tried to advance anti-racism, decolonization of curricula, all the other things that we talk about wanting to do in your position there?
Well, we are in the process of thinking about it across our whole school, and we are with landscape architecture and architecture. And I think that in our school, landscape architecture and planning are more aligned. My faculty, we are a small faculty, there's 8 of us, and we, I think, are quite aligned and are thinking about it at many levels in our curriculum, hiring, having to advocate for hiring. We have a diverse faculty, but we also know how quickly that can change with it, you know, and really having to bring that forward. And so we're having this very active conversation, and partly I do think it has to be an active conversation. I think it is something that it will say all white faculty have to be very aware of. And I do think there's a particular role for chairs, but I also know that if a chair is going to be, you know, an associate professor, woman of color coming in and having a, you know, a bigger, older faculty, like it's going to be a lot harder. Even coming in, we've had some retirements in my department in the 6 years I've been there has become easier in this way. We're more aligned you know, kind of conceptually, intellectually with our values than we were even when I arrived 5 years ago. And so I do think that but I do think it's something that it is critical for chairs to keep at the forefront and just articulate. But I do think my perspective is one thing that's really important is that there is a lot of unrecognized labor built into this. I mean, there's a lot of parts of it, but that's something that is so clear to me in my department, that the faculty who are women of color they're doing so much work supporting our first generation students who are the majority of our students. So, and are just doing it in a lot of ways. The students want to talk, or they're having, you know, something that becomes, I want to talk about my assignment, becomes I've had these experiences in other classes, or trying to navigate, or thinking about this. I mean, doing, you know, had a faculty member who was doing workshops with, you know, other Indigenous women students. I mean, just to have like a group of people really theorizing feminism. But I mean, you know, and she did it and she was very interested, but it also meant she was doing that in addition to everything else she was doing that everyone else was doing, right?
Right, right.
So I think that there's also a need, there's a real critical need for chairs to be doing the work to see it and to recognize it in workload, in tenure and promotion, as well as in departmental values, and bringing that forward. So anyway, I think.
You're great. Yeah, I was going to say Dr. Smith and then Dr. Hu. I think you each wanted to jump in.
Oh no, I'm honest, I've been multitasking, literally taking phone calls from students. So my last phone call was over, so I didn't want that to be seen. So I'm actually now officially here. So
Okay, well, we're thrilled you're here. So, and the firefighting and multitasking, that's the evidence of a chair. Dr. Hu, did you want to chime in? Ivy?
I think we are all learning, and I want to share a good experience we used to have, and we want to continue. So a few years ago, one of the white male faculty in our department kind of had a women's allies, and they had a male only meeting and talking about the barriers that they think or women feel, or they I guess they reflect on, because I was not there, I can only hear it from the comments. And I guess they reflect on the barriers they impose on women, or the actions that they can take. So this year we want to reinitiate that kind of action. And we were organizing a all-white faculty discussion or talk, because we hear a lot from faculty of color, students of color, and from the community organizations. We think now it's a time that white faculty probably include white students altogether, and in an environment that they feel safe or less intimidating, probably is not the word, but safer environment, so they can talk and reflect and provide actions for future. So just an idea I want to bring up.
Thank you, Ivy. I would observe, getting back to sort of, this idea of, well, what's the role of the chair in leading any big initiative? And I guess I'd observe that the way you show what the unit cares about is how you help the unit spend its resources. And those resources include your dollars, and those resources include your time. And if you, what I'm hearing Renya doing in her position, I think what Ivy was talking about as well, is that if advancing efforts of the Black Lives Matter movement, if in dealing with whatever it is, the big ideas that your unit, that you as chair think they need to be pursuing, is you have two tools at your disposal. Number one is you may have a little bit of money to throw at things. So if there's labor that is otherwise uncompensated and you're able to direct it to people to help support them, that's one way to advance things. The other is to make room on agendas at meetings, to keep it as part of your ongoing conversation. Jeff Brown has done a great job in the department here, and they regularly talk about the important stuff. It's part of the agenda at every faculty meeting. It's not a let's do a retreat in August and figure it out then. It's an ongoing conversation. So think about investment of dollars and time, because that sends signals about the things you most care about. I think that's if I'm trying to extrapolate to a larger lesson, whatever your passion, when we got back to my initial, started off this session saying, what are you doing this job for? What are the big ideas you're interested in prosecuting? Prosecute, go after those ideas, but go after them regularly with your resources, money and time that you have available. That's the best you can do. Other questions or comments? We're sort of at the end. And Renya, I can't remember our time frame here. What's our timeline for this part?
We have about 9 more minutes, and then we'll take a break. So I do have one question. If no one else has a question, it's on a little bit about navigating the university administration. This is also something that I experienced a few years in being chair, and now it's happened a few times. And I realized that part of my experience is me probably not being a particularly diplomatic person in moments, but about kind of respecting or not respecting this hierarchy about the dean and provost and so on. And particularly when we are talking about sort of value-based differences, maybe with a department and a dean, or around one situation that kind of occurred when I was chair was a dean not understanding the situation with a newly hired faculty member who hadn't finished her dissertation. So the dean came out of a different discipline, didn't have a PhD, so maybe less experienced with it. And there was a deadline for her to finish. The signatures were like a week later, and it was going to remove her tenure track position for a year. And I thought this seemed really unreasonable, but somehow was getting nowhere within that. So I just sent an email to the provost and said, is there really a reason this has to happen? And the provost said, no, like, does she want to retain her tenure track position, which was a little surprising. And I was like, yes, I have actually spoken with her about it. And then it was okay. And then of course, then it came down on me, so just being honest, within my school, because I had gone around my dean. And I realized that there probably was a better way to navigate that. But I have now really come to see that I think that there's a really important relationship between faculty members and provosts, particularly when we're talking about ensuring that we are dismantling racism and sexism within our institutions. And some of that is hard to do within your college at moments. And so I don't know if, Tim, you would just have some thinking on that, because the provost and the dean's roles are a little bit different. And it was something that I know that I don't think that I really understood until I, had sort of gotten in trouble a few times with it. And I think I wasn't really understanding, possibly better ways that I could have navigated it.
Sure. So every university is different. So there's not a one size fits all, but most universities have some level of chain of command, and the expectation is usually that you operate within that chain of command most of the time. There are times to operate outside the chain of command, and there are times to do that. In fact, I had a bunch of scenarios in the slideshow we won't talk about, but doing an end around where you sort of go around a dean or whoever it is that's stopping or holding things back. You need to understand there are times to do that, but you can only play that card so many times. There's a time, if you do it too often, the people above you at all levels get frustrated by that. So Renya, I understand why you did what you did, and I suspect your dean wasn't happy, but you ended up with the right outcome. But if you're, and I know you're not doing this, but if you were running around, you were bypassing the dean with lots and lots of decisions, that's probably not going to reflect well on, certainly not on the dean, but probably there's a little bit of blowback for you and the program. So there's a, choose your battles when you're going to fight those, I guess is what but there are times to fight those battles.
And maybe one question for you, Tim, and this is actually a real question, it's one I can't answer, is that there's certainly moments where in a sense, our upper administrators say things like, oh, you can come to me in confidence about these things. And it's never been really clear to me how much confidence things are held in. And I would be interested in this, and this has come up because UNM is in this a bit of a soul searching, thinking our faculty is more diverse than many universities, and yet really surprised as we have had this NSF Advanced grant that's, trying to understand and improve the work conditions and so on for faculty members of color and women faculty member in STEM. And some of the surveys have shown that UNM is certainly not a comfortable place for many faculty members. And so the administration's been doing this, and many of it has come forward. So I would be interested if you feel like that kind of stuff, if faculty members go to the provost, if the provost thinks about what the implications of it, or if they talk to the dean about it.
I have tips for succeeding as a department chair, and one of them is be discreet and trustworthy. I'm a big believer that if somebody comes to me in confidence with something, you really need to hold that in confidence. Having said that, human beings gossip. Human beings love to tell stories. Oftentimes our university communities are more interconnected than even we know. Person X happens to be the partner of person Y, and person Y plays racquetball with that person. And all of a sudden that little piece of information that got shared is in the ears of the person that you didn't want it to go to. So you need to be discreet in how you handle things. What I always try to signal to people is if somebody comes to me and says, I need to tell you something, I try to be in the habit of saying, number one is, If you tell it to me, you've told it, right? Because once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's out. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is how important is it, or how discreet does this need to be handled? You know, is this off the record? Are you telling me this because you do want me to do something? You've got to send signals to people and about when they're telling you things, and then you need to send signals to people if you're telling them it in confidence, and you say, I really need you to not tell anyone else this. That's the most you can do. But I guess what I would observe is once you voice something, it's been voiced. I'll also observe, even more importantly, once you've written down something in an email or in a text, if you're in a public world, it's discoverable. It's a public record. So think about that as well. So Renia, I'm sort of giving you a very, very administrative answer. Take care with what you say and to whom. And if it really is something that you don't want shared, you probably shouldn't share it unless you have to, I guess is my view.
Yeah, Stacy.
I just had a question about that, that idea of, you know, it's a slightly different thing, but, you know, the chair job's really hard and you do need to talk to people about the things you're struggling with. At the same time, when you tell them, you've also, like you say, the toothpaste is out of the toothpaste tube. So, I mean, I've experienced that where I was frustrated with something, and then that person ended up communicating it to another person, and then someone got mad at me and kind of, you know, yelled at me. It was about staff or something I was frustrated with someone, and so I went back and I said, hey, you know, it's really important when we have our meetings, this is with someone above me, that these are confidential conversations, because I have to talk to someone about what to do, otherwise I'm gonna explode, you know. And so I just wanted to also put that out there, that at some point you have to take care of yourself, and talking through those challenges, you have to figure out who that circle, you know, that circle people that you can trust enough to, you know, hey, should I go this way or this way? I'm not really sure which is the best strategy, or should I just let this go, or should I, you know, that kind of stuff. And yeah, so it's a lonely job if you don't have people to talk to about things that are difficult to resolve.
Stacy, absolutely. Great point. One thing is you don't complain down the chain, or you don't moan within the local family, right? Sometimes a chair will make a mistake that they're buddies with certain members of their faculty because before they were chair, you were really close. Once you're a department chair, those relationships change, and you need to realize that you can't share with them in the same way that you used to. So that's be careful who in the family you talk to and what about. What I urge you to do is, I see a great set of wonderful faces here. What I found is I had colleagues at other institutions, and I was not a name person. You don't call and say, let me tell you about Professor so-and-so, and they're such a pain in the butt, and here's why. It's, hey, I just need to tell you, I've got this faculty member, and they're driving me nuts, and here are the things that they're doing, and I'm feeling disrespected, or whatever it might be, and share it with people that ideally don't know these folks. It's ideally you've got friends and loved ones outside of the university that you can talk to about this. But Stacy, it is a lonely job, and there are times you need to vent too. You tend not to want to vent to your dean, because deans don't like hearing venting. They like to hear good news, not bad news. That's most deans, although we deal with bad news. But find those close connections and figure out who you can trust. If people do burn you, you do need to gently but firmly make it clear why, you know, what happened, and that they need to be part of your life solution. And if they're unable to do that, they're no longer part of your life solution, I guess, is what I'd hold up. Renia, we're out of time here. I could talk all day. Anything else?
And I will say that if everyone would join me in thanking Tim for having this discussion with us today. And we will take a break until 1/2 if you're in Mountain Time, that's 2:30. And I expect that's not most of us. And then we will come back and we'll have a panel that Cherie will be on, and Rolf, as well as Priyam Das and Lisa Servan, just talking about the first few years of being a chair. And then that'll lead to a discussion just about, about being a chair. And so we will, so feel free to just stay on, feel free to stop video and mute yourself and then be back in 10 minutes, or however, we'll just leave this room open. And once again, thank you very much, Tim. How we were gonna start this last part of the day is to have a panel with, 4 different people who are all in chair roles in different situations, and just talking a little bit about situations. And then it kind of started as like, what's something that was just important to know in this role, right? I mean, advice you got, advice you wish you had. In my case, if I ever say it, it's always the mistakes I made, that things I wish I had, been more mindful of in the beginning, that I now realize, that different things. And so that perhaps I will just turn it over. I will just introduce our 4 panelists today: Priyam Das at University of Hawaii at Manoa, Lisa Servan, University of Pennsylvania, Cherie Smith at Texas Southern University, and Rolf Pendle at University Illinois, Chapel Hill, not in Chicago.
No, Champaign-Urbana.
Champaign-Urbana. Sorry about that. I should have it written.
That's okay.
Chapel Hill's not even in Illinois.
Not last time I checked, although.
And maybe I'll just turn it over. Everyone was going to speak, and then we'll just use that as the starting point for the discussion. So perhaps Priyam, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Renia, and everybody else on the committee for inviting me to join this panel. I became chair in 2018. I came in as interim chair, and I had just received tenure like 2 years prior to that. So I came in with like 0 experience. I didn't know what I was doing. I was kind of totally unprepared to take on the role. But it was kind of this sink or swim moment. And so that ended up being like a huge learning experience, some of which I'll share later on. But yeah, that's just a quick introduction. Renia, I don't know are we just introducing ourselves now and then getting into the...
Renia, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
That worked well. So maybe everyone introduce themselves and then can share do it in 2 things, and then we'll start sharing some experiences. So maybe Cherie.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cherie Smith, and I am the interim chair at Texas Southern University, which is a historically Black university. I became chair in the middle of the semester of the fall of 2016, in the midst of a major transition of president, provost, and dean. So Rolf's shaking his head. And some of it happened with some of the things that Joanna, you were mentioning earlier, when the upper administration is the problem. And I was one of the faculty. And so that actually created very strange scenario, because once I became the chair, I will say the associate dean, the dean, and the chair then became faculty in my department. And they are full professors, and I'm an associate professor. So that began my tenure as chair.
Lisa?
That sucks. Really bad story, but it's not uncommon in academia. So yeah, I'm Lisa Servan. I'm at the University of Pennsylvania. This is my 4th year out of a 5-year term as chair. I keep saying that to convince people that it really is 5 years. That's something that happens, is people just expect you to keep doing it, and you can say no. I actually was a dean before I was a chair, which is kind of weird. I was at the New School before I came to Penn, and I leapt over that. The New School was also in a crisis when I did that job. So it's an interesting and very different job. In some ways, I prefer the chair job because I don't really like the whole fundraising and development part. And I continue to like having contact with students and having some time to do my own research. But yeah, so happy to, lots to say about how to help you all with the role. That's funny. Term 6 of a 5-year term. Say no, Renya.
Hi, I'm Rolf Pendahl. I'm the department head at the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And I am in my 3rd year, which seems like about year 25 in the middle of COVID. Before being at Illinois, I was at the Urban Institute in Washington, D.C. for 8 years, where I led one of the research and policy centers, which is called Metro. It's a unit of the Urban Institute, which was a bigger and more complicated organization than the one that I'm leading now. But it was also a lot more straightforward than the one that I have right now in terms of hierarchies and reporting and tracking time and things like that. So it's been interesting. I think being a newcomer to the university and to the department, which some of you may be in the position of, and some may, maybe in others, may give me a kind of different perspective than those of you who've risen through the ranks. And so I think that might be an interesting topic for the breakouts, those of you who have seen your colleagues become chairs and who are now the chairs in situations where you have to essentially make decisions that affect your colleagues, your former colleagues' outcomes. It's really different, and I think probably uniquely challenging.
And so perhaps then if each of you would talk a little bit about something, either you learned or, good advice you received or that you would give. And Priya?
Yeah, sure. So, there's, like I said before, it's when you're shoved into this position and you're not kind of ready or mentally prepared to take it on, there is no playbook. And so it's a lot of just learning on the job. But I kind of try to pull out 2 things that have really helped me kind of take on this job and make it relatively more like manageable. So one is building relationships, right? So being able to maintain a direct line of communication with my dean to the extent possible, and really learning to sort of communicate with her. So that was one thing that took me a while, but I feel like I'm at a place where I've managed to make it into a more productive relationship. Also communicating with the other chairs in the college, depending on, how your setup is. Like we're 13 chairs in a College of Social Sciences. And so really having that support of all the other chairs and learning from them how they're managing their programs and seeking advice from them when I'm stuck or I don't know how to tackle a particular thing, or I don't know how to negotiate with the dean on a particular issue. I've always reached out to them. So that's one. The other thing is cultivating relationships with key people in different units on campus. So that has really helped me as well, like grad division or the IT department or scheduling office. So there are all these like different units on campus, and having sort of 1 or 2 key people in those units that you can really establish that line of communication with can go a long, long way. And then again, off campus as well, making sure that you have the support of the Alumni Association, if you have one, APA chapter members, and then also community partners. This is particularly important, I'm finding, at this time with COVID, because a lot of universities are considering reorganization, for instance, right? And so for programs that are facing that threat of being reorganized, you may need to mobilize these groups in order to support you. So that's something I would recommend as well. And then the last thing would be to manage expectations, right? So that I'm trying to do that through shared governance so that faculty don't assume that you're doing this on your own. You stepped up to be the chair, but then it's a shared governance process. And so everyone is responsible for how the department moves forward. And so being able to set that culture, moving away from sort of delegating work to promoting more participation in departmental issues is something that I'm trying to push forward too. And then of course, tempering my own expectations, because as chair, you want to take on all these things, but everything is not possible. So you really have to temper your own expectations when it comes to getting things done. So those are just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Sri.
Many things I would like to echo what my what Prima said, but I would say the one thing, one of the questions is what did I wish I had known, wish I knew before? And there were 2 areas. One, and many of you had the session this morning, was the budget. Between foundation and state lines and a variety, there was just so much that I really did not know. And I wish I had known before. And the other piece was just and it's been said before, really the psychological and the emotional toll that weighs in there. Because really, if the ship is sinking, then you need to be, the one still playing the fiddle. And, we've had Harvey, and I felt like I needed to still be on campus because we still had students that were in the dorms because it hit right after we had opened the dorms. And when people don't know where else to call, they call the department chair. And even with COVID, still being able, all the chairs were still in the office. And when something happens with someone, they reach out. And I never realized how probably emotionally or psychologically draining that. It's actually enriching because it's that they trust you, but it can, if you don't have another outlet, then it can be a bit much. And I wish I had known that. What I have learned is, and this was probably the best advice that I was given, is to always maintain who you are. There were reasons and skill sets and talents as to why your colleagues voted you in or you were appointed to step in. And don't lose who and what you were, because it's easy to get caught up in a variety of things that are happening, but the core of who you are is who people want to see. And it's important that you remain true to that. I've moved a lot more towards the shared governance, and I realized that if we had worked through that, then I wouldn't have not known about the budget. And so that was one of the first things that I've done is, all the policies, the budgets, the accreditation standards, everything that we have, I put it out there for everyone. And I've been very clear, I'm only one person. And if we want to move forward, each of you have to step up and decide which part of this pie you want to bite off. And again, managing, and I see Priyam smiling, managing expectations of how that actually happens. And so I have learned this kind of question statement, meaning you want to do that, don't you? But probably the last piece is trying to figure out how to empower each of my faculty. Each of them needs something, even those who are, I'm a distinguished professor, I'm a full professor, but each of them needs something. They need something professionally, and how to empower them. Because I find that when I'm able to empower them and they recognize that, then it's easier for us to begin to work together, because it's not a you or I, it's not a us or they, we are a team. And if I can support what you need to do and go to battle for you, then I will do that. Raina, I have no problem going after my provost, hunting them down. I have stood outside the bathroom to get what I needed from that man. I've gone to meetings and now he knows who I am, but we understand. I say, if I have to do this, it's because you have not responded the way that I need for you to respond. And I've always been real clear, it's not for something that I need. It's usually for something for a student or for a faculty. And I've done all the protocols. And so if I'm here now, it's on you. And we've had that conversation, but that was the person that I was before. So I had no problem going, doing that. But I think letting your faculty know that you will fight for them is important, because then letting them know that they have to choose their battles, because I'm not going to fight all the time. And I think that's been really helpful, and we're working towards trust. And I think once we get that, we begin to really move forward. But it took a while. It took a while, and I will be honest, I am interim for now my 6th year. And because I thought we were going to hire a position. And so the fact we're like, oh no, we want her to stay. And so I don't know how I end up being an interim for 6 years, but I really feel as though the chair and the faculty treat me as if I am their chair. And I think that's a wonderful thing, but it took us a couple of years to get there.
And Lisa? Thank you.
Thank you. I want to echo much of what Priyam and Cherie just said, and add some things to it. I think one of the things I think that I think about all the time is when you get your PhD, nobody really teaches you how to teach. You're like thrown in the classroom, and it's the same thing when you become a chair or a dean, is nobody teaches you how to manage. I mean, there are people who get PhDs in management. So it's crazy that we are educational institutions and we're kind of told to manage, and there's almost nothing harder, I think, than managing people. And here you are, and it's maybe even harder when you've risen up from the faculty, and especially in places where there's sort of a rotating thing. I mean, Rolf and I, both came in from the outside in our current situations. I kind of rose up from the faculty to be a dean, and that's really hard, especially if you're going to go back to that, because you do end up making hard decisions about the people who are your colleagues. And so it's unlike other management jobs too, in the sense that, if you're a CEO or something, you come in and then you might go to another company, but that doesn't happen as much in academia. So that's one thing. I actually, when I became dean at the new school, I asked for money to see a professional coach, an executive coach, and I was told no by the provost. Said like, I'll teach you everything you need to know. And of course I was like, I need to learn how to manage you. So managing up is hard. That's another thing, I think, but I had a great sort of associate dean of administration who found the money for me to do that. And maybe that's something that not everybody can afford, but it was money really well spent. And haven't used her in a long time, but when I got to Penn, I did a little bit of that, using my own money, saying like, okay, here's the cast of characters in this place. And what do that was super, super helpful to have that resource. You might be able to get it from an outside mentor without having to pay someone. But I think recognizing that management is really hard, and figuring out what you need to do is important. I actually have this memory of my first year being chair. I don't know where we were. Rolf and I went to graduate school together. We were like in the same cohort, so we're good buddies. And Rolf was still at the Urban Institute, and we were taking some long walk at ACSP, and I was like babbling about all the things I felt like I needed to do at Penn in my first year being chair. And Rolf said like, why don't you focus on like 2 or 3 things? I hope you took your own advice, Rolf, when you started. But that was, I still think about that all the time, because many of you maybe share this trait of, you come in, the department was in great shape, but I still had all these ideas and things I wanted to do. And there are only so many hours in the day. And I think my other colleagues have already said this, but really thinking about what are your priorities, being transparent about those with your faculty. Hopefully they jive with what the faculty wants too. That's partly your responsibility, right? But also, they've also asked you for your vision coming in to say, and for example, Penn was like 100% white when I came, and that I was very clear that one of my agenda items, that my top priority was to make it more diverse and inclusive. And luckily the faculty supported that. Let's see. I think creating some structure. I had, for example, when I was at the new school, I had a provost that I reported to who was awesome, but he didn't he didn't meet with me regularly necessarily. I never got annual reviews. And so if you need that kind of structure, like you can create it yourself and say like, I want to get on your calendar once a month. You know, can we have a meeting so you can tell me how I'm doing, like not begging for praise, but certainly like building in that structure. And the last thing I'll say before we move on, actually two more things. One is to use university resources. So others have talked about making relationships. I think actually that's one of the advantages and benefits of being in administration is that you get to know your college or university in this other way and connect with people around the university. And that can be really lovely and wonderful. You get to see it from a different perspective. There are also resources like we have an ombuds person, for example, and I've used her a fair amount when there have been issues with faculty. The last thing I'll say is just to set boundaries for yourself and take care of yourself. It's, I think we, even whether we're faculty members or not, we tend to think that we're indispensable and we're not. So like just to recognize that like if you get hit by a bus, the university, the department are going to continue. So, nobody will ever tell you to take a break or work less. And so you just have to like, you know, let people know when you're not answering email, send signals, you know, tell people that you have, like my family has screen-free Sunday, go on vacation. Like you're not brain surgeons, you know, I tell even the women who work in my office will say like, we can't reach, I'll say like, you know, I'll give you my phone number and you can reach me if there's an emergency, but otherwise people are going to use your out of office thing. I mean, just really, the reason my hair is wet is just that I got out of the shower because I worked out before this meeting. So like really, really take care of yourself. Otherwise you're going to burn out and be no good. And actually think of it as setting an example for the junior faculty in your department, for your students about how you need to create some work-life balance. You're setting a tone at the top.
So I guess I just say ditto to everything, and I have, you know, maybe a couple of specific examples of ways that you might operate that could be helpful with some of the things that Lisa, Cherie, and Priyam have already touched on. Going sort of backwards in terms of picking your priorities, when I got to Illinois from urban, I didn't know like what was going to work and what wasn't going to work. And if I'd gone in with my two priorities and they were like dead on arrival, it would have been pretty disappointing and not a really great way to start. So I had more like a portfolio of ideas that I came in with, that I had, some of which I had before that, some of which I generated, you know, just in my head in the first couple of months. And then I spent the first year sort of sorting those out. What my mistake was that I didn't communicate clearly enough to people that I didn't want to do all of these things, that this was going to be naturally like a sorting process where I, you know, threw a lot of ideas out there, and then I focused in on like 2 or 3 things in year 2, which I was able to do. And then of course, COVID makes everything complicated. So that's, I think, thinking about how you're going to find your priorities. If you're coming up from within your unit, it's a lot easier than if you're coming in from outside, trying to find the new relationships that several people have talked about, and the people who could be your collaborators or who could in fact get in your way. And sort of testing things out that way. So that's in terms of picking your priorities. The second thing in terms of the budget, from Cherie's comments, I think one level up from the budget is the business model of the department and the college and university. The budget is what you've inherited, that's kind of the external face of the business model, but a lot of it is locked in. Like, you know, you may have a very little wiggle room once all the faculty salaries are paid for. The real concern for my university right now is how is the University of Illinois going to get through what is a fundamental problem in Illinois, which is, in a lot of places, there's going to be a cliff in the number of high school students who graduate in about 2026 in the state of Illinois, and they're really worried about that. So the question is, where's the revenue coming in in your department, and like, how can you make sure that the decisions that you make on your strategic priorities align in ways that you're confident you can tell a story about them if you're asking for something more that says, yeah, I think this is going to help us, you know, meet our revenue goals, essentially, you know, however it is. And, you know, obviously you don't want to be completely revenue driven, but you're going to have choices to make, and you have stories that you can tell about the things you want to do, some of which might generate a lot of grad students, but maybe your department isn't, quote, making money from the grad students. Maybe it's from more online programs, right? So think, well, if I have to do more online, then how can I leverage the business model thing about the online to serve my mission? So that connection between business model and mission, it takes a little while, but it's a way to be not so depressed about the crises and the stresses that come with the sort of weekly budget management, the annual budget cycles you'll sort of go through. And then the third thing, just in terms of making connections, and this is something that's true where I am now, but also when I was at the Urban Institute, I think the single most enjoyable thing that I did as a director in both of these two places, just on a month-to-month basis, was I had a scheduled monthly breakfast with my co-directors at the Urban Institute, and then with the other unit heads at Illinois before we went into the COVID lockdown. And sometimes we would, you know, do business kind of stuff, but sometimes we would just catch up, and we got to know each other. We're getting to know each other as people that way. So I totally agree with what Priyam said about making connections with the people who are at your rank, essentially, especially within your own college. But you may not have that many people in your same college if you're only 3 or 4 departments. So thinking about how you can extend that and, you know, get reality checks and also feel like you're free to complain about your dean or about the students or your faculty or stuff. So making that safe space and not feeling like it's just one person, like you have the permission, you're establishing the permission for everybody to be there. It's been tremendously helpful for me. Maybe you all are doing that already for yourselves, but it's like that, you know, that scone and that cup of coffee, you know, early in the morning with my colleagues, it's just a nice feeling. So that's all.
Well, thank you all, and would like to now just open it up for any initial responses or questions to the panelists that they can directly answer. And, you know, in about 10 minutes or so, we thought we'd go into breakout groups and just have a conversation both about challenges you're facing or things that you really like about your, you know, your position in, you know, being director or being chair. And sometimes those things are, you know, integrated. But are there any particular, you know, or questions or comments? Yeah, Dean, please.
Thank you, Rania. I've been chair for, my 3rd year. I just enjoy learning, listening experience from colleagues here. Just want to add, Priyam, I did the same thing like you. I call chairs in my college, and also I called Jeff Brown for the state because I graduated from Florida State. I called him, hey Jeff, the first week of the second week of me on the job, I call him. I also call Bruce Stiftel. So I I learned from somebody who already been there. So I just do that. But yeah, again, even I already going 3rd year here in the position, but still learning every day, and that's why I'm here to listen from other chairs. So Rania, thank you for running this.
I have a question. It's not a riddle, but what is the maximum number of reports that a chair can do in a semester? Because my number is growing, but I think that was one of the things that caught me and I learned after the first year was to start scheduling them so that even though I wasn't getting the email from the dean or the provost or a variety, I knew that this report was forthcoming. And it's important because oftentimes a lot of the reports require the same data. And that was what was really frustrating. I felt like I was collecting the same information and doing it for SACs or doing it for whatever entities. And that would be the one thing, you know, as you work with your administrative assistant, if you go through one iteration of it, begin to organize what data is needed for what report and when those reports are due. And so as the semester progresses, you're automatically collecting it. And when the reports are ready, then it's not as burdensome, because you've already been pulling the pieces together as you go, and you already know this is forthcoming.
And I'd be interested for any of you panelists, anyone here, for most of the reports, do you do them yourselves, or do you have other faculty members work on them with you, or possibly delegate them? And the delegating always, I personally get amused with, because I learned that, like, the previous chair who I followed at UNM used to delegate them all, as I am diligently trying not to burden my faculty. And I thought, I'm doing something very wrong as chair. But I'd be interested on how you think about that.
So my perspective on delegation is that, you know, I think it was Priam talk, or someone talk about shared governance. Maybe that was, yeah, I think it was Priam. That the special thing about shared governance is that it empowers you as a leader, not even to have to delegate things, that it becomes clear over the course of, you know, a series of meetings and conversations that the role of the person who is leading or with whom you're sharing the governance. So for example, we have both a master's and an undergrad program in planning. And it's sort of empowering them to do that and giving them certain benefits for taking on that responsibility. It's natural that they should want to take part in developing the self-study report, for example. So, you know, making clear what those roles are and what it means to do shared governance means that it doesn't feel as much like, you know, here you have to do this for me. And same goes with ongoing committees. And also I've used task forces each year that I've been here, meaning like a 1-year charge to a subset of people who are interested in making a proposal to the faculty about doing something. And that task force, you know, I leave them alone until they come back to me and the rest of the faculty with a proposal to do what they want to do. So if that sounds like delegation, maybe it is, but a lot of the time those are issues that the faculty themselves want to generate. They're things that they want to get done. Is that responsive, Rania?
Yeah, I think I just want to add that shared governance is also important because, like, for us, because we don't really have that many staff members, so we just run with like we have a secretary, and then we have 1 or 2 students who are on a federal work study program, and that's pretty much it. So we have to do all of the work, which is why I prefer to, instead of delegating, I prefer that everyone sort of volunteers to do something. And so, but to answer the question about the reports is, I inherited this really amazing, like, giant Excel timeline sheet from my previous chair, which is really helpful because it has every single task and deadline, that the deadlines that come up by month. And so what I do is at the beginning of every semester, I look at, you know, okay, this semester I have these, and then that way I'm like prepared to tackle them. So that's been really helpful too. But yeah, I hear you. There are just too many reports to write. So it's a good idea to organize your data in a way that you can just retrieve them for every report that you need to write, just having them in one place. And we just got done with accreditation. So we've been through this whole process and had to do it from scratch to kind of set up everything. So the next time around, we're not in a pickle.
Yeah, Deedon, please.
Oh
jump in.
yeah, yes. Question. I already heard from Rolf that Rolf, you enjoyed being chair or a director when you had that moment of sharing with your co-director or unit in your department. I'd like to hear from others, Priam, Lisa, Sherry. What make you happy doing what you have been doing? what the most enjoyable moment you have?
I think for me, it would be just when I took on this position, I was told by a previous chair that you can decide what kind of chair you want to be, right? Like you can either just get by and manage the department. So you're balancing the budget, making sure your programs are running and like do minimal things to kind of just stay afloat. Or you can be a chair who wants to really take on things and shape the direction of your department, right? When I took on this position, we were like in a really dire situation because we had a lot of transition, like some of the others have spoken about. We had like retirements, resignations. We had 3 chairs in 3 years. And so we were like in a really rocky situation. We were down faculty FTE and we had accreditation. We were like up for reaccreditation. So when I became chair, I pretty much didn't really have a choice to do the, I'm just going to manage the department option. And I had to hit the ground running and try to kind of tackle each of these issues one by one. And it was an incredible learning experience for me. And it thankfully for us, it worked out. We were able to hire a fantastic group of new faculty who are like brimming with new ideas. So that's a third of our faculty now. And then we just got news last week, well, this week actually, that we've gotten like the full 7 years reaccreditation. So it's, I mean, it has been a reward. I mean, it's challenging, but at the same time, there is a reward to all of this, right? Like it's about just how flexible and open-minded you go into this job as. So I guess, so it's definitely been an exciting time as well, despite all the challenges.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, you know, the benefit of going in with somewhat of a vision and some priorities means that, you know, you kind of have these moments. Like one of the things I do at the end of every year is just kind of make a list of things that we've accomplished and send it around to the faculty. And I'm always sort of heartened by seeing like, wow, we got a lot done, or we did a lot of, you know, we raised money for fellowships. We got through the accreditation. We got 7 years too. You know, we had 1 Black student when I came into this program, and now we have 15. So like there are really things like that where you can sort of say like, here were my priorities, here were my goals, and we got together, we got some things done. So I think, you know, everyone knows the frustration of sitting on the other side of the table and feeling like, you know, nothing's happening, or the chair's not doing their job, or you don't share the priorities. So to be able to sit in that seat and drive the bus for a little while is really hard, but it also has that kind of gratification. I also really like I feel like I meet all of the students. Recruiting is like really hard too. That's always a very stressful time. And yet like knowing them from when they've applied and talking to them on the phone and then seeing them all the way through to graduation, I like some of that stuff. I realize when I go back to the faculty, I'll just probably know the ones that are in my classes. So, and I think part of, one thing to hold on to in terms of getting that sense of satisfaction is, I definitely know my research and writing have taken a hit being a chair, even though I get 2 course releases to do it. And I can feel resentful about that because I really like my research and writing. But I think kind of reminding myself that it's a short-term thing and that like, this is what I'm doing now. I can't do it all well. That gets back to the self-care and setting boundaries. So like as Priyam was saying, like you can kind of do it. You can just keep the train moving on time. But if you actually want to get something done, it probably means you're going to let go of other things. And, I've kind of made my peace with that myself and said like, okay, so for these 5 years, I'm not going to write as much. It's okay, and I remind myself of that when I start to feel resentful about like the Friday I kept open for writing, starting to fill up with meetings. But try to keep your Fridays or someday free for yourself also.
Thank you, Lisa. I think that she hit on something that I've always been passionate about our students. And I think the one thing that I do like, I have to admit, when I first came in, my goal was just to manage. It was just keep us from falling apart. That was really my first, as we were dealing with the variety of different administrators. But I think my true north has been our students. And what I do like about the position is that I can use this position to get indoors, to have conversations about internships, to have conversations about having them as guest speakers and having them come to us and really being able to be an advocate and a champion for planning. And I've learned, because there's other places that I'm able to move our students or have conversations about, and I like that because as the chair, I can say I'm speaking for the department. And in my mind, I can go through what students I'm talking about or what faculty need support. And I have to be honest, that is probably for me, that's the best part of the department or in the position is because I can leverage the position to be able to assist my students in being successful, not necessarily just in the program, but after they graduate.
Well, and that's a great segue that if we are going to, break up into smaller groups and really start with that real question on what we really like about what we are doing and why being a program administrator or chair, whatever role you're in. And also like that can be part, linked into the challenges, or there may be challenges that also detract from that a bit. But that'll just be a question as a prompt. But first, if you would all join me in thanking Cherie, Priyam, Lisa, and Rolf for participating in our panel today.